Big shout out to our guest, Tracy Twyman, the lady thinking outside the gift box. Well, no, that's not entirely accurate. With Tracy, there is no box. And if you're familiar with her work, if you've read any of her books or blogs or heard her on other podcasts, you know what you're in for. If you're unfamiliar with Tracy, Jesus, tap dance and Christ, are you in for a sweet, sweet audio treat? Well, sort of. While the material presented here is high-grade sonic kush, we did have some audio issues here, and I am so very sorry for it. Tracy was on a cell phone and the connection was a bit spotty. She sounds a little hollow from time to time, which, if I think about it, is sort of appropriate considering some aspects of the conversation. Of course, I did my best to clean this up and balance it out, and it turned out okay. If you stick with it, though, trust me, this one gets good. So let's crank the volume on this one up to 58 and cast this pod off plus ultra style deep into the hidden hyperspace kingdom of the elite, where LARPs are front page news, Mithras is the mayor, and a local sex shop sells sun-drenched diamond dildos. Enjoy. Tracy Twyman, thanks for being here.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for having me.
No problem, no problem. You know, I'd like to start off on a personal note, and if I have a connection to somebody that they're unaware, I would like to brief them on that. So just grant me a moment here. I just want to tell you a quick story. About 8 or 10 years ago, I started writing a novel that actually was turned into a series of novels. And I had kind of sketched out 9 books in this series of novels. And I'm still working through it. But I'm not going to tell you what the plot is because it's kind of irrelevant. But the title that I gave to the entire series, which I know that you're familiar with, was actually Plus Ultra.
Oh, well.
And I was not aware of your work back then. I was not even aware of what the phrase was connected to. I had done some basic searching on Latin phrases, and that was one of the ones that when I was searching through like a Latin phrase dictionary that stuck out to me. I liked what it meant. It was pertinent to what I was writing about in the series of novels. And then here I am now, doing this podcast. I've been introduced to your work through this genre of podcasts, and lo and behold, you have an entire history with that phrase that I was completely unaware of. It's part of your membership section now, or it's the name of your patron section, I guess, on your website. So I just wanted to throw that out there. It's sort of it's a synchronicity that those kinds of things have been popping up a lot for me in the last couple of years, especially since I've been doing this podcast. So I do want to talk about Plus Ultra. For those of us that are unaware of what that means, you know, maybe take us through what that means and how it relates back to what we'll be talking about today.
Well, it was a phrase that was affiliated with the Royal House of Spain, and they had put it on their coins after they started colonizing the New World, and they were, you know, mining gold and silver in tremendous amounts, and they were really proud of their accomplishments. So that's why they put this phrase and the logo that they did. They made it into their coat of arms and put it on their coins and stuff. It had the 2 pillars of Hercules represented as actual pillars, like of a building, 2 pillars, and then there was a banner on each one. That's one said plus and the other said ultra, and the phrase means there is more beyond. So they were saying there's more to our empire beyond the pillars of Hercules, and there's more stuff to be discovered. There's more land, there's more wealth and gold and silver and other wonderful things beyond the pillars of Hercules. They were just boasting about their accomplishments and the scope of their empire. And that phrase and that symbol is thought by some to be part of the evolution and the influence on the dollar sign that we have, the S with the line through it. Because these Spanish coins with the symbol on it were the first coins called dollars in the American colonies. They were actually reals. They were Spanish reals, but people called them dollars, and sometimes they called them pillar dollars because they had the pillars on them. So anyway, it's a phrase that is associated with a symbol that's part of the evolution of our money, the history of the money that we use here in the United States. And it's also, and in fact, there's dollars all over the place, and I think they all use the same dollar sign. So it's you know, part of all that heritage, the heritage of the dollar as it's used today, even the Australian dollar and all the other ones. But the other thing is, it has a broader application because it's also sort of a symbol of everything that's kind of beyond the scope of normality. So, yes, it represents the old world from its perspective, looking at the bright future beyond the Pillars of Hercules, the bright future of things that have not been explored yet. So it's been used in other contexts since then as a way of representing even going beyond into another dimension. And that's kind of what I've been focusing on in the last few years when I write about it. I'm usually talking about it in that aspect. And I think that a good representation of how that interpretation of it has been around since the beginning almost is when it was used in one of the book plates, or no, one of the I don't know if it was the frontispiece, but it was one of the main illustrations in Novus Organum, the book by Francis Bacon, and it had a ship going through the two pillars of Hercules. And in that specific context, it represented going into unknown, not only the new world geographically, but scientifically, new information. So that's the way I'm using it, and that's the way several other modern groups apparently have been using it, is just as a symbol of going off into the unknown, not only scientifically, geographically, but even in what I was saying in terms of physics and the dimensions that we're in. It's the idea of going and seeing something from a higher, broader perspective. And in fact, one of the things I've been explaining to people lately in my writing and on some of the videos that I've put out is you can see this symbol or this concept on the Masonic tracing boards and other Masonic symbols that include the pillars, especially when they have the 3 pillars. Sometimes they have 2, but sometimes you can see the third one there also. And it's usually presented as being kind of off to the left. And you can tell it looks like you wouldn't see the other pillar unless you were looking at it from the right angle. If you were looking at it straight on, you would only see 2 pillars. But if you look at it from another angle, then you can see the third one in the background. And they'll often have a stairway going past that pillar, kind of off up into the sky, or a long, twisty road, kind of, again, peeling up into the sky, going up. So, and then at the end of that road or that ladder or that staircase, there'll be an opening in the sky. So it's showing you going through the pillars and going beyond. And that third pillar is like the third pole. And I'm literally talking about, you can think of it geographically. They actually have the directions of the compass written on the edge of this Masonic tracing board I'm thinking of, where they have the 3 pillars. And so they showed the sky, that the direction that's associated with the side of the picture, where the sky is, it's like at the bottom you have the ground, at the top of the picture is the sky, and then you've got left and right. Well, the sky is the north, according to the compass that they have on this Masonic symbol tracing board. So they're showing you a different way of thinking about dimensions and perspective, that going north could actually be going up. And I don't want to, I guess maybe we need to have a little bit more explanation before I launch too deeply into this, but basically we're literally talking about the idea that you could go travel to the North Pole and then travel beyond it and be going up, and not just, to the, around the ball to the other side, but that, you can actually, by going forward, start going up because you're traveling through the pillars to another dimension. I guess that's just one way of explaining the idea that I see embedded in Plus Ultra.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to unpack there for sure. And you mentioned the third pole, and I think that's a good transition, maybe perhaps, into the fourth pole, which I call the pole on 4chan, and what's going on there right now. So,
yeah,
yeah. So Plus Ultra does connect to this insider named QAnon, who's been dropping what they call breadcrumbs on 4chan for the last couple of months. And then Plus Ultra connects to that. It also connects to Donald Trump. This connection to me is pretty fascinating. So I was wondering if you don't mind, let's just explain what QAnon is, what's been going on there, and how it relates to Trump and Plus Ultra.
All right. Well, QAnon is a person claiming to be a White House insider and really a confidant of Donald Trump himself specifically. He implies that there's several conspiracies going on and that Trump only has a few people he can talk to that are on his side. And he claims that there's a military coup afoot that he's presenting as a good thing. That he and his friends, close to Donald Trump, are actually trying to get the New World Order and arrest all the bad guys and take their money. And it's implied that it's related to the Pizzagate phenomenon, that all the people that need to be arrested have also been molesting children, and they're all part of this cabal that's controlling the world by controlling politicians through blackmail, by setting them up with child prostitutes and then videotaping it. That part, I know that is basically what runs the world. That is true. That's how politicians are controlled. And so that I have no doubt that's going on. So that's what he's saying, basically, that what it sounds like, he's trying to get somebody in the world to have some understanding that this is what's going on, so that there will be someone on his side. If you were to take it literally and actually believe him, that they're trying to get someone on their side to understand what's going on, when it will appear to everybody else that there's just this horrible military coup happening and we're going into martial law and this Nazi Donald Trump has taken over, and this is the World War III, this is the end, this is everything our parents warned us about, and this worst chapter in history happening right now. But this guy is trying to scream out and say, no, it's not a bad thing. The New World Order is actually the bad thing, and we're trying to put an end to it. So if you were to take it literally and seriously, then that's what he's saying. That's the message he's trying to convey. Now, of course, I mean, I don't know how much experience your listeners have with 4chan, and me, I only really know I've been on the X boards and I've been on the Paul board, which is the politically incorrect board. I don't lurk on there other than that, and I don't always go there either. It's not something I do every day. It's only when I hear that something juicy is being talked about usually on the POL, the poll, because lately, over the last year or two, that's been a place where information actually is dropped from insiders. And it's probably just because there's an audience there. There's a sympathetic audience, and you can do it anonymously. And the people I don't know about the rest of 4chan, but I know that certainly on Paul, they have a culture, a community of what they call themselves autists, right? So it's kind of this joke that they're all somehow on the autistic spectrum. They have social problems. They're not very good at socializing, but they stay at home on their computers doing research and geeking out on certain subjects. And so the idea is that if you were an insider with a whistle to blow and you wanted to get some information out, you could do it on 4chan, and specifically on Paul, because you could do it anonymously, and then people will take the breadcrumbs that you drop and find out if there's something to it or not. And actually, I think this is not a bad strategy, because people can do what is happening to QAnon, which is he's getting attacked every thread that he posts something new. He gets attacked for what they call LARPing, which means, live action role playing. Like, basically they're just saying that you're a liar and you're joking, you're trolling us. And so anyone who takes Q seriously gets attacked by that also. But if you could just somehow filter out all that, in the midst of that, there are people who are actually taking the information and seeing if it's, if it leads to anything, if it bears any fruit, if it helps them put together any connections. So one of the things, QAnon is dropping details about, and sadly, a lot of it hasn't come to pass. There have been a lot of promises that we don't see the evidence of yet, but he's saying that there's hundreds of indictments, sealed indictments for people, famous people that we've all heard of, involved in politics and involved in business, who, supposedly are going to get arrested for everything from pedophilia to financial fraud and treason and all sorts of things. But the reality that this seems to go along with, and this is all the stuff that, most of it is the stuff that you could be, if you were a LARPer, just playing along with, like, it's a convenient time to have a game like this because, for instance, what happened in Saudi Arabia, where all those royals got arrested and they're holding them in a hotel room, making them, or in the lobby of a hotel, making them sleep on the floor until they agree to give up 70% of their wealth, because, supposedly it's all ill-gotten gain, and they should, give it back to the people, basically. So you could think, well, there's an example, and that's what QAnon has done, is try to take credit for that and say, oh, that's part of the whole coup that's going on. And he says, you can't believe the media; they're not going to tell you what's going on. John McCain and Hillary Clinton, for instance, they're wearing some sort of orthopedic boot because of some injuries that both of them had individually. But QAnon says, well, actually, that's just hiding their ankle bracelet because they're actually under house arrest waiting to be prosecuted. So that's all very interesting, and that's why I ended up going back to 4chan a couple 3 weeks ago when QAnon started posting a lot, saying that, well, it was back when the president was on his tour where he went to Saudi Arabia, then he went to all these places in Asia, and so the whole time he was gone, QAnon was telling people that, oh, when he comes back, that's when everything's going to get started, and he's going to make this big announcement. And the only thing, everyone waited for this big announcement. The White House actually did say, we have a big announcement. I forget what he even said, because it was nothing. When he finally came out and made his big announcement, it was a complete anticlimax. But he made this weird gesture of drinking Fiji water out of a bottle with both hands in this awkward manner that a lot of people have interpreted as being some kind of message. And I, in fact, have my own interpretation of it. And the reason why someone would look for that is because amidst all this stuff about all the criminal activity of various elites, and I'm talking about people all over the world, the Saudi royal family, the British royal family, politicians in Europe and the United States, England, Canada, and Hollywood even, QAnon is trying to link that, which I see is not a bad claim. It lends a lot of credence to what he's saying. All the people that are getting in trouble in Hollywood for sex offenses, all of them have been rendered mute now. They cannot jump in and be used politically against the president right now because they can't speak. They're running away from the press right now. They would just end up defending themselves if they tried to say anything against the president. So it could very well be that this is what's happening in Hollywood right now, is a operation to neutralize political enemies. But the reason why people would think that, why they would look for cryptic clues, like, is there a meaning in him drinking Fiji water on camera? Well, amidst all the more straightforward information that he drops, QAnon also has all of these very obscure phrases that he uses. He's telling you that they're clues to a mystery. He implies that there's these big government secrets that are going to be disclosed having to do with, at first people thought it was aliens. And he said something about benevolent ETs, that would be on down the road after the coup happens. We'll disclose the existence of benevolent ETs. So that's the way most people took that. But then he put out a bunch of other stuff that I saw and I understood the meaning to, that I don't think very many people have. But he's implying that there's more to the geography of the world than what we're told. And I don't know, I don't myself have a complete theory about what the geography of the world is, but this is something that I subscribe to at this point. I would say most definitely. I think that there's territory in the world that we don't know about. And it could be everything from what has become quite popular now, the idea of, Antarctica is really an ice wall. The territory we see on our map is really something that occupies a flat surface, not a ball, and that there's other stuff beyond the ice wall that we don't even know about. So that's the modern and popular flat earth theory. That is one example of, how you could think about this. I'm also just entertaining the general idea of what I was saying before about there being another dimension, but it's not just something that you have to, take a bunch of drugs to experience or something. I'm thinking you could actually just go there and see it if you knew the right places to go. where it would be literally like climbing a mountain that's high enough that when you get to the top, you can look down and see all sorts of things that you couldn't see before that you didn't even know existed because you're seeing it from a higher perspective. So I'm thinking that this is what he's implying, and I would really have to kind of go through. I probably need to go on my website to remind myself some of the things that have been said, and a lot of it has happened even recently. I haven't had a chance to respond to it yet, but I've seen it. At this point, okay, I know this is going to sound pretty wild, but okay. People think that QAnon is so close to the president that he might even be the president himself. That's been implied in some of the posts. You can tell that it's this. There's one identity that's posting the stuff that's really from him, from QAnon himself. Because when other people go in there and they try to pretend to be him, they don't have the same what they call trip code. They don't have the same ID that's identified with his posts. So we know what has actually come from QAnon, and some of the things that have come from him specifically really do make you think it's the president himself. Plus, there's things that the president has said in his own posts on Twitter and even in public where it seems like he's acknowledging it. So the other day he posted something, it was on this place called magapill.com. And he was posting a link to what was it was a list of his accomplishments. But if you were to just click from that link that he linked to on his Twitter to the main page of this website, magapill.com, the first post you would have seen on that day that he did it on Twitter was about QAnon. So other people picked up on this right away and said, hey, look, the president's linking to this crazy conspiracy site. But he didn't acknowledge that, and he kept the link up. I don't know. I saw it like over 24 hours later. It was still there. But the website itself, magapill.com, had been attacked. And the guy who ran the website said, we're under attack. You can't silence us. We'll be back soon. So someone hacked this guy. It's obvious because the reason why is because here's the president linking to a website that's telling you about QAnon, and that it's serious. It legitimizes it. And so I absolutely think that website was taken down probably by spies from the state because they didn't want to legitimize this. Now, I don't know how real it is in terms of, is this guy really from the president? But I don't think it's just what the critics try to tell you, which is that, it's some loser in his mom's basement pretending. I mean, it's either what it presents itself as, which it probably isn't, because nothing ever is, or it's, a psyop where we're seeing a war between factions and they're putting it on the internet. They're using the people of 4chan to have this information battle, and the character of QAnon is a way of doing it. But so what that means to me is either way, the president is in on it to some extent. And you can kind of tell from the things he's posted. There's another thing where he did plus, in one of his emails or one of his tweets. And he put that, I'm talking literally 3 plus signs plus an exclamation point. He put that at the end of one of his tweets. And it was just seconds apart, they said, from when the same code was posted by QAnon on one of the first posts on 4chan. So things like that definitely indicate the president is in on it. Okay. So the president's in on it, and there's all sorts of hints in the material that what is being claimed to be disclosed in the future has to do with, like I was saying, other territory that's hidden by the manipulation of our perception of light and therefore our ability to see the other dimension. And I can get into that a little bit more. I don't know if you've seen. I mean, have you looked at, I guess, the stuff that I put up the last week or so? Probably.
Yeah, that's kind of what I wanted to talk about here, was this idea of a plus ultra secret society, how that connects to Disney's Tomorrowland. I know you've done a couple of posts on that, and that I think also connects to these what you're calling hidden hyperspace kingdoms. And yeah, I would love for you to flesh those ideas out.
Yeah, well, you're mentioning about the hidden hyperspace kingdoms. That is something that I've been writing about recently and connects directly to the plus ultra idea in ways that I didn't even know about until, maybe a year ago. So what I'm talking about is a hidden hyperspace kingdom is a place that exists and is hidden from the perception of most people by some sort of manipulation of dimensions, manipulation of your perception of light, holographic basically. But so people can live there and no one else will know that they're there. And I absolutely think at this point that these things exist and the elite know about them and are utilizing them all the time. And there's just places of safety that they go whenever they want to, whenever they feel the heat from, regular Earth, they go somewhere else. So we're used to hearing that the elite go off into what they call private islands and they hide their money in offshore accounts, especially when they think they're going to get taxed or they might get arrested or something. Well, I think that they go further than that. I think there's actually other places where there's hidden territory and property and wealth and raw materials and technology that we don't know about. And I think the best way to understand it is to think about some of the ways that it has been represented fictionally. So the examples I like to give are something that a lot of people are familiar with, the Atlas Shrugged novels. Or there was one novel, and then actually some of the ideas were explored in other writings of Ayn Rand's as well. But in Atlas Shrugged, the elite of society actually do go off into another place. They call Atlantis, and they hide it with some kind of special technology. It's in the Rocky Mountains, and they have basically a hidden force field over it, so you can't see it from the air, and no one knows it's there. And this is where they go because in that novel, society's falling apart. Basically, businesses are getting taxed too much, and creative people aren't being rewarded for their efforts. So therefore, they all go off in disgust to this hidden world. So that's one example. Another example from literature about, I would say, the 1930s is the work of René Damal. He wrote a novel called Mount Analog, and he never even finished it, but it's had a lot of influence in literature. The idea is that there's a mountain in the world. It's bigger than any other mountain in the world. It's on an island that's a bigger continent than anything in the world. And this is all actually in the Pacific Ocean, but you can't see it because it's made of what he calls peridam, which is a form of diamond, but it's harder than regular diamond. And it's so dense that it actually bends light. And that's why you can't see it. It's creating a gravity. He believes in gravity. It's creating this force that's bending the light so that you can't see it. And also, if you were sailing, it would turn the currents so that your ship would just go right around it and you wouldn't even know it was there. Now, I don't think he has all the technical details down exactly for how it's working, but he's got actually pretty close to describing what I think is going on. And I think saying that it's in the Pacific Ocean, well, he may have something there, because his argument was that he was talking about the fact that there's a half of the globe, if you look at it as a globe, where most of the land mass is on that side. And there's really only a couple things. There's Australia and then a couple islands really on the other side. Oh, and Antarctica, supposedly. So there's actually a term in geography for this called the hemisphere of land and the hemisphere of water. If you go to Google Earth and just look at the Pacific Ocean, you can turn the ball in such a way that everything is blue completely from your perspective. That half of the ball is completely water. And so René Damal was saying, well, there's got to be something else there gravitationally balancing the planet. So that was his whole idea, was based on that. He dreamed up the existence of this mountain because it seemed like physically it just had to be there. But it, of course, matches up with what people have been saying since ancient times about where the gods live, and the idea that there's a pole holding up heaven, and that it is this mountain, in fact. That Atlas is, in fact, a mountain or a pole that's so high that the top of it you can't even see from here because it's in another dimension and it's holding up heaven. It's holding up that other dimension. So that's what Renee DeMol was describing. And I think it does exist. I don't know if it's exactly what he was thinking, because he was thinking about a round ball Earth and just trying to think of what could be in the middle of that water that's on the other side, all that water of the Pacific Ocean. But what I'm seeing is just that it could be more complicated than that, I guess. I think that Donald Trump's, or I mean, not even him, Trump and QAnon's clues that they've put in about Fiji and Malaysia. There's some clues about Malaysia. I think that those are pointing to this idea. And in fact, it's very close to Fiji, the place where Renee DeMol said that Mount Analog actually is. And strangely, around the time that I figured this out, and I was telling my friend about this, and my friend was telling me about how the antipode of Jerusalem is right around that same place. As we were talking about this in a restaurant about a few days ago, at that exact moment, that exact hour of time, there was a major earthquake right there in that part of the ocean. And there was a tsunami warning for all the islands that are there. It was just an amazing coincidence. I'm not saying that I have magical abilities or anything like that. Maybe psychic abilities. I'm not saying I caused it, that's for sure. Maybe I picked up on that it was coming, and that's why I started talking about that at that moment. But it was just a weird coincidence, and there's so many in this story. But to get to the plus ultra thing and how it really just undeniably connects, I went looking for it, because at a certain point I was like, this dude is reading my website. There's no way, because he started talking about Tomorrowland. Tomorrowland is another one of those examples. Okay. In Disney World, they have something called Tomorrowland, and they also had a movie called that. And then there was even what seems like a role-playing game or some kind of video game or something going on the internet that's related to Tomorrowland. It's called Plus Ultra, or Stop Plus Ultra, I think is what it's called, the game. And it's because in the story of Tomorrowland, there's a hidden hyperspace kingdom that's called Tomorrowland, where the elite, and specifically elite scientists, go to have and enjoy a society made with technology that they don't think regular society is ready for. So, it's another example of the elite going off and hiding and having things that we would love to have, just like in Ayn Rand's story. And then the same thing even was going on in Renee DeMol's story. Like, they had an elite society there. Only the chosen could get in to the island if you happened to find it. Even then, you were challenged. You weren't just allowed to live there. You were given a bill as soon as you arrived, and then you had to get jobs to try to find a way to pay your bill off. And if you didn't, then they killed you. So this is a ongoing theme here in literature that I think reflects a reality of what's going on, which is that the reason why the elite seem like they're so brazen and unafraid of us is because they really do have places they can run away and hide to, where they know that no one will ever find them. And they have, they're not really that afraid that you might take their money, because that's just a fraction of what they have stored up in what their real home is. So this is the idea, I think, that's behind Plus Ultra in a way, and the Disney franchise is definitely using it specifically for that meaning. And then I found out that, I noticed that QAnon kept referring to this, using all the same kind of phrases that I was using in my articles. He specifically mentioned Tomorrowland too. He also mentions Alice in Wonderland, which is a story about going into a hyperspace kingdom, and Sleeping Beauty. Okay. His references to Sleeping Beauty, and especially a lot of them recently, it's obvious. Again, he's specifically talking about, I think, something I wrote in one of my articles. And I also put it in a video that I put out. So beauty is that middle pillar that I was telling you about, that is represented in the Masonic tracing boards as being the pole beyond the poles in the higher dimension. Because in Freemasonry, and also the place where they got it from in the Kabbalah, there's these three pillars, and the one in the middle is called the pillar of beauty. There's wisdom and strength and beauty. The middle pillar is beauty, and it's asleep because it's hidden from view, and it only kind of gets activated when you go into it and become aware of it. So the way that he was using that phrase, it's very specifically about that. And I'm the only person to have talked about it in any recent times, as far as I know. And I didn't get it out of any book either. I just sort of saw that, that connection. And so I went looking for plus ultra plus QAnon to see if he'd been to my website, because it's obvious to me he'd been to my website. I wanted to see if anyone else had pointed that out, if anyone else was talking about it. And sure enough, I found a post that had been made, not by someone calling themselves QAnon, but by WH Anon, calling himself a White House insider. But this post was made about a month before the QAnon stuff started. But he was foreshadowing it. He was saying, big things are coming. You just wait and see. There's going to be a big revolution. And talking about how Donald Trump is part of the secret society called Plus Ultra. And they pointed out that he's got this phrase in the tiles and wall decorations of his Mar-a-Lago estate in Florida. And then they talked about how apparently his uncle was, I guess, a nuclear scientist and involved working for the Navy, and was actually in charge of examining Nikola Tesla's materials, his personal possessions, immediately after he died. And his job was to do this on behalf of the government to see if Tesla was doing anything dangerous. So Trump's uncle had access to things that no one else has seen since then, they say. And this is a fact. I looked that up, and that is true. So what's implied in this post that was made in early September by this person that I'm certain now is the same person who later called himself QAnon. He's saying the president is part of this thing called Plus Ultra, that there's all this stuff in the world that you don't know about, but he's going to reveal it to you, the world beyond. And, that it's connected to Tesla technology, which implies free energy. And that goes along with the fact that the reason why he calls himself Q is because he has Q level security clearance. And that's a security clearance specifically designated for the Department of Energy. So since the beginning, since a couple or 3 weeks ago when he started posting as QAnon, he's been implying that there's free energy coming, free energy technology. Which only makes sense because it goes along with the ability to make a hyperspace force field that will make something invisible, like what I'm describing. So that's what I think, that's what's being implied. That's the narrative here. Now, I could be all wrong. I could be totally wrong about, the hyperspace kingdoms and all that. Maybe I'm believing something that's really just a myth, but I'm reading these symbols of the myth correctly, and they are using it. They're using the myth. They're using even my interpretation of it. And it's being used by people definitely connected to the White House for psyop purposes, if nothing else. And so that's where I'm at. I'm decoding their psyops. They're using my material. We're basically talking to each other. When QAnon posts, especially the last week, I know that he knows I'm reading it, and there's certain things that are in there just for me. So I don't know what to tell you, except that we've got this funny little game going on, and I'm just waiting to see an actual revelation to show me that it isn't a LARP, because as far as I can tell right now, it could still be a psyop. I'm hopeful, but I think it'd be great to see some evidence here that this is a well-intentioned, real revolution and not just a psyop. That's where I'm at.
Yeah, that is quite a lot of thought-provoking material in there for sure. LARP or not, it's a fascinating story at the very least. And the way that you were just describing it, how it relates to you personally, that does seem to mimic in a way the character that's based on you in your novel Genuflect. This person who leads this really, exciting life, and she gets kind of sucked into this, I don't want to call it like a geopolitical game because it's much more than that. But did you maybe sort of hyper sigil your way into this spot here?
Maybe so. I didn't see this coming, because in the novel the person gets involved with a group of elites in England who, the main character sort of based on me, they're in England, getting sucked into this conspiracy world where there's a cult of Mithras operating kind of in the shadows, doing Pizzagate type stuff to, molesting children and things like that to try to control politicians. And she gets involved with this person that's blatantly based on Michael Bloomberg, and who literally did just open up an office building where he brought an ancient temple of Mithras, a Roman temple of Mithras, from the place that it had been sitting badly restored down the street back to its original location. And now that's the bottom floor, like the basement of his new office building in London. So I wrote a story where a bunch of horrible occult rituals happen there, and the character based on Bloomberg is really this Mithras cultist, and he's trying to not only take over the world, but kind of turn the world into a kind of artificial prison and ascend it to a higher realm where he's going to rule us from above. That's just kind of a short version of the story. But what's funny, because that was a character based on me becoming involved with Michael Bloomberg. And I've been expecting actually something from Bloomberg, like some kind of threat or lawsuit or something, No, I don't think that he actually would be successful in suing me, because I really haven't done anything wrong. I don't think I've broken the law at all, and I haven't lied about him at all. But I was expecting some kind of, some action from him so far. And I think there may have been, but I think it's all been behind the scenes, nothing direct. I think that he might have helped to get me kicked off the radio the other day when I was on. But anyway, because I was talking about him and I was on with like millions of people listening, and all of a sudden I got cut.
Wait, was
I
that
didn't
on
see
Coast
it having
to Coast?
to do anything. Yeah, Coast to Coast, which I've been on, many, many times before for over 20 years. So it was really weird for me to be treated like that all of a sudden. And I think it was probably Bloomberg. But I didn't see the Trump thing coming because, I have not had a strong opinion about him. Like, I know that everyone really passionately hates him. I don't. And then there's some people that have these kind of what seem to me to be just childish fantasies about him, being able to save them somehow and save us. And I've always just tried to be skeptical of that. I didn't vote. I don't vote. I don't believe in, I don't philosophically believe in voting, so I don't participate. But I guess my opinion about Trump has just been, I hope for the best. Like, I mean, if you were to take it at face value, if you don't think it's all a sham and that he's in on it, that he's faking everything, then what you've got is a guy that's not part of the club, who's actually in charge, in a seat of what should be a seat of power. If they weren't circumventing his rights, he should actually be in control of the military, and he should be in control of all sorts of things. But we know the truth is that there's 17 different security clearances above that of the president, and there's all sorts of things going on that they don't even let the president know about, and they're used to pushing the president around, and he's basically just an actor who goes out and makes speeches. So they're not used to someone trying to actually exercise power from that seat. If that's what he's actually doing, then all I could say is, I wish him the best, and it's a dangerous position to be in, obviously, that he would have put himself in if it was true. Then if he's not lying, then here's a wealthy guy who had everything going for him, had no reason to want to muck up his life in any way, and he's put himself, behind, in the crosshairs of every sniper that you could hire in the world. Everybody is waiting for a clear shot, and they're open about that. The CIA has basically put their own spokesman out on TV to kind of openly threaten to kill the president. And so you got to think he's put himself in a very dangerous position. He either did that unwillingly because they've got him by the balls somehow. They've got him on camera raping kids or something. And so he's a slave like all of them, and he has to play this role. Or he's willingly put himself in danger for some reason. So all I can say is I hope for the best. I can't tell at this point what's going on. It's very complicated, but it seems like they don't like him. The establishment, the ruling class did not want this person to be in power. They do not want him to get his way with anything. So that you can't help but be sympathetic to that and hope that he can get his way, because otherwise that means they get to keep doing what they're doing. And we know what direction they're marching us into. It's been going on for a while, and you can tell where it's headed. And, I don't even think I need to summarize it for the audience. I think you all know. So I guess what I'm saying is, to answer your question, yes, it's kind of like my novel, because in the novel, yes, a person who's just an esoteric writer, and even a self-published writer at that, of a writer about obscure subjects, which is what I am, ends up being influential in current events and politics because of her influence on the elite, because they are actually into the occult, and they end up reading her stuff to try to get information about their own rituals and their own beliefs. And in reality, yeah, I think that does happen. That has happened. I mean, I have, for one thing, yeah, I've seen my ideas influence the public, in a way, in many cases. I don't want to go over it because it would sound bad. I don't like to brag. I really don't like to come off like an arrogant person. And if I would tell you what things in society really have a lot to do with me and my influence, it would sound like I'm very arrogant. I can't help but notice, okay? And so I'm not that surprised that things that I've written about end up being used for psyops, because they get used for TV, they get used for movies, they get incorporated into the general philosophy of people, and so does it happens for anyone who's putting out information that's true, that's powerful, that strikes a chord. Of course, it's going to influence everybody. So I don't have any doubt that I've had an influence in it, but I also know about magic. Meme magic is one example, and that's what, had a lot to do with what put Donald Trump in power. So my book itself, I expected it to be kind of magical in a way, and I've been seeing it ever since publishing it. In fact, before then, I noticed that things that I would write about would start to happen in real life, even just as I was writing it. And after I published it, it started even more. And so I'm talking about everything from strange anomalies in the sky, like the ones I write about, to geopolitical events, financial events. There have been quite a few of them that correspond to things that were in my novel. But as far as, the fact that this is what it seems like, maybe me writing about hidden hyperspace kingdoms in the very direct way that I did, this is just what I have a tendency to do, is just completely open up a whole package of occult symbolism that's been hidden in plain sight, hidden under allegory for centuries. And I'll come along and start researching that topic, and I'll just blow it open. So, I've done that with money. I did that with Baphomet. I did that with the mystery of Rennes le Chateau and the Priory of Zion. And now I'm doing it with Plus Ultra and the hidden hyperspace kingdoms. And what that forces the elite to do, the ones that, are the hidden sort of spiritual elite, they know about all of the really weird stuff like this. They're initiated into the really occult stuff. When you bring it out into the open, like I do, then they have to operate within that new paradigm. So I kind of feel like I forced the issue with the hidden hyperspace kingdoms. It had already been coming out. It was about to come out because flat Earth was becoming very popular. And that's just people becoming aware that there's more beyond, there's more territory than what they're telling us. That you can't just rely on Google Earth and Google Maps to tell you what place it is that you're living in, and what direction even is. So, people are primed to look for that, for hidden territory. And so, for me to bring it out in the open and say, hell, you got to look at hyperspace too. And you got to look at that as a way. We know that the compass doesn't work in the way they tell us it works. It's not telling us the same thing that the mainstream science has always said. It means something else. The directions mean something else, And so now people, enough people know that the elite have to now cop to that and explain it and say what side they're on, basically. If Donald Trump already knew that, and the Rothschilds already knew that, and Donald Trump really is against the Rothschilds, which is what he's implying with the QAnon posts, well then, now that I've revealed that there's hidden hyperspace kingdoms, they have to tell you what side they're on. So Donald Trump is saying, oh yeah, I'm on your side, people. I'm going to show you the hidden hyperspace kingdoms, and I'm going to let you have all access to all of the wealth and land that's there. You need to be on my side because these other people, they're trying to hide it from you. Well, he wouldn't have said that before, I don't think. And because he would have sounded crazy. But now, and probably because also he wanted to keep it secret for him too, There's no reason why they want to reveal their secrets. But once it gets revealed in a way that they can't put it all back in the package, and they can't hide it anymore, then they have to start dealing with it. That's what I think is going on.
Well, shit, Tracy. I mean, that is people should just go research it, because we don't even have enough time to dig into some of the even more esoteric aspects of just the 4chan stuff. But I mean, you've done a good job so far of breaking that down.
I want to apologize for not putting in a lot of details of, interpretation of symbolism. But the reason why is because I would have to explain every single symbol, and that would end up being another several paragraphs of me talking. And I don't want to ruin the total flow of what we're doing here. But I've got some articles on my website that explain this, and I'm going to be doing more. In fact, I'm going to have to, by the end of this week, put out a video explaining everything about QAnon and how it relates to what I just talked about, the plus ultra concepts, because only when you see it all put together like that will you see, I'm not just projecting this and seeing a reflection of myself in everything. I'm not making this up. It really is there. And once you see that, it's really going to blow your mind, guys. But yeah, if I explain to you all these weird little phrases and what they mean, it'll just take too long. So that's why I'm being vague, and I'm sorry, but I just have to.
No, it's totally cool. And I think the best way for people to absorb this information is to get it on their own, that's, I think, the way that I don't want to say that you convince yourself that something is real, and I'm using real in quotation marks, but I think it's the best way to absorb information is just to digest it on your own. It's one thing to hear two people talking about it on a podcast, but I think it's a lot more impactful on you when you have the space with yourself to absorb it, read it, watch videos about it. We'll definitely link to all your pertinent blogs and your videos on this in the show notes. But I do want to spend some time here, what time we have left, talking about your novel Genuflect. And you kind of summarized it several minutes ago. There's another way to summarize it in just like a few words, and I think you wrote it yourself. It's just about an alchemical ritual to sacrifice and regenerate the sun as well as the other classical planets. So, you've talked about this in several other interviews, but for those of us that are not familiar with what that statement means, this alchemical ritual to sacrifice and regenerate the sun, what is that exactly, and how does it play a role in your book?
Well, the idea is you would do a ritual where you would entice these spirits that possess the 7 classical planets. We're talking about the planets that ancients could see with their own eyes. You're working within a viewpoint where they are spirits. They're what are called aeons, and they occupy the 7 heavens above us. And the sun and the moon are also included in those 7 classical planets. So each one of those has their own heaven. And so if you did such a ritual, you would be calling down those spirits into physical bodies, enticing them with sex in the sex ritual, because that's what even the gods themselves, according to myths, sometimes cannot resist certain types of sex offered to them if they come down and take physical form. So we're talking about a ritual where the 7 gods are enticed to come down from heaven into physical form, where they then become vulnerable and can be sacrificed. Then you take the sacrificed gods, including the physical bodies that they occupied, and render them alchemically through a physical process to turn them into a new egg of a new aeon. And what we're talking about really is kind of a new universe. I hate to use that word because, of course, the word universe implies that there's only one, but a new reality, I guess, and that's really what I think the Gnostics meant when they used the term aeon. They're not the only ones to use it. I mean, it's just a Greek word, but it implies a reality, an entirety of its own. But what's hard to grasp is that you can have one reality supplant another, because the reality has time inside of it. It's kind of erroneous to even talk about one coming after the other, but that's how we talk. How we talk about the fall in the Garden of Eden as something that happened in the past. Well, that's an example of one reality supplanting another, and we think about it as happening in the past, but it's really a total reality being supplanted, so you can't even really bring time into the equation. When they talk about God creating the heavens and the earth in 7 days, and then on the seventh day, he rested. Well, I've heard people say that the word that's translated as days really means aeon. And so the people that told me that were trying to say that, it's a mistranslation in the Bible. God didn't create the world in 7 days. It was 7 aeons, which means 7 epochs of time, which means that's evolution. And that's, everything that scientists have been telling you. That's what God took a long time to do it all, is basically what they're saying. But that's not how I interpret it at all. I think what we're calling 7 days are 7 aeons, but that's not what an aeon is. It's not just an epoch of time. It's an entire reality. So what is being said there in Genesis is that the present reality that we're in was created on top of 6 others. And on top of the seventh, God rested, like he sat down. It's a floor for him. So it's a totally new way of interpreting that phrase. But it makes sense if you start to understand this idea of stacking realities on top of one another. And that's what the role of Atlas is then, is to hold up the reality on top of him. Atlas was a Titan. The Titans were defeated in Greek mythology by the Olympian gods, and then God ruled on top of him. Zeus ruled from on top. And we are part of the world that is supporting the realm of the gods that's on top of us. So this is a running theme throughout Genuflect. And the reason why, it's part of why it's called Genuflect. It's talking about the role of the subservient, supplanted, enslaved aeon and the people trapped inside of it. And that role in regards to the ruling class or the gods that rule above you, whatever is on top of you. So what the villain is doing in my story is trying to escape this prison and be the one on top. And it involves destroying the pillars that uphold, the invisible pillars that hold the realms that are on top. The way to do that involves, like I said, bringing the gods down into physical form and then destroying them. That breaks the pillars. It's actually what ends up breaking the pillars in the ritual is the sex itself, because the victims of the rape that take place in the sex ritual, they are gods too. And in my story, the one that gets the worst of it, the sort of climax of the ritual that really destroys the foundation of Earth and makes the pillars start to collapse, is the victimization of a child that has embodied the spirit of Uranus. So that's the realm beyond Saturn. That's the highest heaven that we have perception of. So when that's brought down into physical form and then violated physically in the most vile way during these rituals, that breaks the foundation of reality, basically. It's something that I decoded from rituals and from mythology. And I think this is kind of really how it works. This is part of why some really extreme sadistic sex rituals are being performed by certain secret societies, occult sects, whose membership involves, some of the world's elite, is because that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to find their own way to get out of this world and get into and generate a new world where they're the gods of it. And in so doing, they turn our world into something that has fallen, something that has become unreal, and you can build something on top of it. This is how I see, for instance, Atlantis. Like in my view, Atlantis still exists. It's just under our feet. It fell, and it fell from reality into non-reality. And the Titans being in Tartarus, it's the same thing. They fell into Tartarus. They fell beneath us, and they're upholding us just like Atlas is. They're the foundation for us. But because of that, they're not real anymore. They're not alive anymore. And therefore, they've been supplanted.
So when it comes to the sun and its connection to this process, what is that exactly? Because that might be a little complex for people to digest on their own. So if you could boil it down, like this idea of replacing the sun with a new sun, and that sort of ushers in this new aeon.
Well, think about it this way. You're like Noah, right? Once you box up the old world and make it into like a little video game that you have in a box, you can stand on top of it and generate the new world from the egg that you've created alchemically, from the bodies of the gods of the previous world, right? Well, what first thing that comes from the egg, and you can check this from the chemical wedding of Christian Rosenkreutz, where they go through this step by step. In the other alchemical works, it's a little bit harder to follow the steps, but in the Christian Rosenkreutz story, they lay it out. So what you do is from the egg comes the sun and the moon, the new mommy and daddy of the new order of gods. All right. So first you get a male and female come out of the egg, and they breed, and from that the other 5 planets come. But you're the god, you're the alchemist who brought the egg into the new world in the first place. And this is actually told. This story is part of the myth of Mithras. If you actually put together all the divergent stories of Mithras and put them together into one biography, what you get is a character who's seen coming up out of the ground, basically out of a rock. He's seen emerging, being born from a rock with a torch in one hand and a knife in the other. He comes into this world. He conquers all of the gods of this world, and with each god that he conquers another heaven. He ascends higher and higher up the different steps of heaven to get to the higher realms. Then he bursts through Uranus, through that highest level that we associate with the fixed stars. So in other words, through the ceiling of the sky, and he takes over that world. But we don't really know. It's implied that he takes over that world. He's the new sun. That's how he was worshipped. But the way I see it, this is all one story, and it never has an end. Because once he goes up through the top, he's seen in the next world coming up through the bottom, coming out of the rock. That's how he gets born. And this is exactly, I haven't mentioned this in the interview yet, but a lot of ideas I get from my research sometimes come to me through Ouija board seances that I do with friends and family every now and then. And recently we were talking to Mithras after I wrote my novel, Genuflect, that had all the Mithraic stuff in it. I wanted to ask Mithras if, what I had said was true, if I correctly interpreted his mythology. And I asked him if he knew what was beyond the fixed stars, beyond the realm of Uranus, and if he had ever been there, if he could describe it. And he said he didn't know what was up there. And I said, did you ever try to go up there? And he said, yes. So I said, what happened when you went up there? And he goes, the planchette went all the way up through the top of our board. And our board is specially designed so that it kind of looks like the inside of a Masonic lodge. And there's actually a ceiling on the top decorated with little tassels. So the planchette, in order to represent what happened to Mithras, the planchette goes all the way up through the ceiling represented on our board. Then it went off the board and slid underneath it and tried to go as far underneath it as it could. And when I grabbed the planchette and put it back on top of the board, it went down to the bottom and then up again. So it was showing me this loop. And then I asked, is that what you were telling us, that you went in a loop? And he said, yes. So, and it took me a couple months to realize after hearing that on the Ouija board that that's actually what the myth of Mithras tells you. Because on one end of the myth, they're telling you about him conquering the realm beyond the sky, the hyper-Uranian realm. And then you just have to put that together with the story of his birth, and you realize that's what's going on. He keeps trying to get out of the matrix, but every time he gets out, he just comes back up through the floor of the next one. So, yeah, I think there's a ritual to try to conquer this, try to conquer the world you're in and become the god of another one. But I don't think it always works out. And I think that's an example of what can go wrong. And maybe that's what always happens. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either, but it's, like I said, it's fascinating. I have two more things I want to touch on. The first is, it connects to this directly, but it's this goddess Cybele, and you say in your book was symbolized by a stone. And I think Cybele is one of those characters that is not really well known enough. So could you tell us a little bit about who Cybele is, how she connects to your story, and then what this stone symbology really means with her?
Well, I think as far as the stone symbology, I'll just say right now, I think that the stone is like the cosmic egg. It's a cosmic egg of a universe or reality. So she came from one of those, and she is one of those too. She's, it's just like being a female. You came from a woman, and you also have the ability to be a mother. And that's what she is. But whatever it is that is the womb she came from and the womb she is, can be represented to us as a stone. Now, it's hard to say exactly what that is, but I think we kind of have the right idea when we think about an, artificial simulation, and think even it like as a board game that's boxed up. It's all in a container, and if you're on the outside of it, it just looks like a box. On the inside, it looks really complicated, but on the outside, it's just a box. So it's kind of like a stone. And I think it could even literally be a stone if you think about it as like a crystal that has very complex facets inside of it. Because the way that light moves through the facets of crystals is itself a language. And I know they even build computers based on this now, and are predicting that they'll have even more amazing computers in the future, specifically based on this, what I'm describing here. It's also, that's something that even is used in ritual magic. This is what John Dee's Enochian magic was. It's a language of the way that the angles that light takes when it goes through crystals. Now, and also I just want to point out, even in the Bible, they compare God and his kingdom to stones. And they talk about the New Jerusalem being this giant cubic crystal, and then you can go inside of it. And when you go inside and actually see God sitting on his crystal throne, he himself is a stone. They describe him as being a crystal. So now it could be that there's more to it, like when you finally get into that higher dimension, that you can see it in a different way. But to our eyes right now, if we were to see God and his New Jerusalem kingdom, it would look like a stone. So I think, maybe when they talk about Cybele, or I guess I've been corrected a few times now. People told me I'm supposed to say Kybel or Kybeli. That I think that it could be a similar thing. And usually she's said to be black. But again, that doesn't mean that she was always black, because stones can absorb light and change color over time due to their exposure to various types of light. So just to briefly summarize her myth and how it connects to everything I've been talking about. So she was supposedly born from a rock and born a hermaphrodite in Olympus, in the realm of the gods. And they thought that she was a freak because she had both sex organs. So they castrated her and then kicked her out of heaven, and she fell down to earth. And then she somehow got pregnant and had a son. And then she was in love with her son and got jealous when he wanted to marry another woman. And so then she inspired him with madness and to castrate himself and let him die of bleeding to death. And then a few days later, she felt guilty about that and resurrected him. And that's how he became Attis and her sort of co-regent as a goddess, ruling. And she's kind of thought of as the goddess of the state, Like she was very much associated with the state in Rome and, the upholding of order. And her priests were all castrated men who would then from that moment on be called priestesses, and they would speak in a high pitched voice and act effeminate and be considered women. So, she's a castrated hermaphrodite. Her priests are castrated men, and, she's associated with the state. And it was a cult that was imported from Anatolia and Persia into the Roman Empire and made into sort of a state cult as well. Well, similar thing happened with Mithraism. It was also imported from Persia. It was oftentimes those two cults were running in the same families. So you would have, Mithraism was an exclusively male cult, but a lot of times the men of one family would join the Mithras cult and the women would join the Kybele cult. And then I guess those men in the family that were oriented towards, attracted to being the priests of Kybele and wanted to become castrated and act and become feminine type priestesses, then they would join that. But these two cults were definitely connected, even though they were separate in some ways and seemingly at odds in some ways because of their attitude towards sex. So in the Mithras cult, like I said, it was only men. Mithras himself was said to really distaste women. He did not like women at all. And in fact, when he wanted to breed a son of his own, he was said to have ejaculated onto a rock. And, it became, because he was born from a rock and they said that lightning inseminated his rock, right? So he somehow did the same thing to a rock, and that became his son Diorphos. And you can tell from the name Orphos that we're talking about the Orphic egg. So he's creating another reality in the same way the one he came from was created. But you have in the story of Mithras this idea of not liking women, not liking normal, male female sexual relations at all. Kybele or whatever, she was said to not like either men or women, and so that's why she chose to be something in between, and she wanted her priests to be something in between also. So here you have these two cults that are kind of against normal sex roles and against normal sexuality. And even in Mithras, they were kind of against marriage, and there were members that were married, but it was sort of looked down upon, and you were thought of as a higher person if you could refrain from relations with women. Well, they had the same kind of attitude in the Templars, and that's been revealed to be the case even just a few years ago when they released the Chinon parchment. The Vatican released it, and this is a contemporary document where the Templars confessed to the Pope. And they confessed about their sex rituals, their homosexuality, and by that I mean their policy that when you join, you had to agree to not have any relations with women, and you actually agreed that you would give in to the sexual demands of your brethren in the order to help keep them pure so that they wouldn't be tempted to have sex with women. So we have the same kind of attitude in the Templars that you had in the cult of Mithras, but then there's also some connections between the Templars and the Kybele cult. And I think that you see that they've absorbed both cults and sort of combined them. And it's probably because they had a common origin in the first place. But the way that you see Templars get buried, the ones that went to crusade, they actually got buried in a special way where they crossed their legs. The way that their bodies are represented on top of their tombs is always in this manner, with their legs crossed. Well, that also happens to be the way in which Attis was always depicted, because he always looks like he just got castrated and he's holding his crotch and with his legs crossed because he's uncomfortable. That's the way these Templars look when they're represented on their graves. The other thing connecting those two cults with the Templars is the deity or demon Baphomet that they worshipped. Because Baphomet is, well, for one thing, his name is connected to Mithras. Aleister Crowley said that the name could be rendered as Father Mithras. And then he pointed out a lot of other connections between symbolism associated with Baphomet, the cornerstone of the Temple of Solomon, and then the fact that Mithras is said to be a stone. Aleister Crowley was describing Mithras as being the cornerstone of the temple and saying that that's what Baphomet is too. Well, in addition to that, there's also the connection with Cybele, because really one of the biggest sources of information that occultists have always had about what Baphomet was is this book that was only until recently in Latin, and I've had it translated into English, but this book has influenced everything that has been written about Baphomet since about 1820 when it came out. And that's called Mysterium Baphometus Revelatum by this guy, Hammer Purgstall, Joseph von Hammer Purgstall. And what this book has is a bunch of illustrations of artifacts that were found on former Templar properties, where they have depictions of the idols that they worshipped in their secret rituals and depictions of the rituals themselves, the sex rituals with children and animals. And in these depictions, they show what Baphomet really was. And you can tell that it is Cybele, but she's been castrated. It's a male that has been castrated and made into a goddess. And the way that this being is depicted in these artifacts is consistent with the way Cybele was depicted, having this crown of towers on her head, and several other things that are the same. But even though the myth of Cybele was that she was a castrated hermaphrodite, that was never depicted in the imagery. Like you never in Rome, in that Cybele cult, they never just showed Cybele naked with a hole there where her male genitals used to be. But that is what's shown in these Templar artifacts, because they were practicing the secret aspects of Cybele's worship, which I don't think were ever even really documented in Rome. And so maybe they made it up, maybe they added on to it, but it's possible they just inherited it from the original Cybele cult. But we know that the Templars were influenced by the Cybele cult. Even the church fathers implied that the Gnostics had absorbed the Cybele cult. And then we know that every commentary that has been made about the Templars, where the writer believes that they were guilty of blasphemy and heretical practices, every writer says that they were practicing Ophite Gnosticism. So Ophite Gnosticism has been documented that it has absorbed the Cybele cult, and it's all part of the same doctrine. So what I'm telling you is that Baphomet, this entity that was worshipped by the Templars, and that the Templar Baphomet worship thereafter influenced the Freemasons and modern Satanists and almost every modern Western occult group. Well, that came from both Mithraism and the Cybele cult. And it seems that the figure of Mithras and the figure of Cybele are related figures. If they're not the same person, then they're related. And it seems like maybe Cybele is mom and Mithras is the child. And it's just, at some point in the story, he gets castrated, which would explain why he hates women so much. But of course, Mithras was never represented as a castrated figure. He's always represented as being, virile and strong. But like I said, his story is out of order. There's no linear way of telling the story of Mithras, because we're talking about a guy who's been beyond the sky and back. So, the fact that he's got a myth, it doesn't mean that the myth tells everything in order. He's probably the son who at one point created his own world by ejaculating onto a rock. And then at another point in his story, he's been castrated by his mother. And, Mithras was always also associated with Saturn specifically. And the priest of their order was always called Pater and associated with Saturn, called the father. Saturn, according to, his myth in Greek mythology, his role was to be born out of the chaos, out of the egg, the original egg. Like Uranus and his wife Gaia Well, originally they were one hermaphroditic being, and they were basically one closed egg, and they had, a baby or several babies inside of their womb, but they didn't want to let the babies be born, or at least the male portion called Uranus didn't want to let the babies be born because they were afraid what would happen afterwards, he was afraid he would be supplanted. But the way that reality got started and the way that supplanting actually happened was Saturn cutting himself out of the womb. So they have the story of Saturn overcoming his father, Uranus, who wanted to keep him inside of his mother's womb. They don't actually come out in the Greek myth and say, oh, it was a hermaphroditic being and everyone was trapped inside its womb. They use other phrases, but when you put it all together, then you can tell that's what they're saying, because they say that in order to get out of the womb, he castrated his father. Well, so, he castrated him while, the penis was inside there, obviously. And that was the plug holding him in. Or, I think an even more complete way of thinking of it is that there were never separate sex organs in the first place. There was just one big enclosure inside of which other creatures were being created and multiplying. And they wanted to get out, and there wasn't enough room. So he cut his way out, and in so doing, he castrated his father. And that's what started everything. That's how heaven and earth, which were originally this one thing, Gaia and Uranus, got separated. And the realm that we're in now is the realm that exists in between them. This is the way the Greek myths are describing it, is we're standing on top of Gaia. We've got Uranus ahead on top of us, and as a canopy, and what's holding it up is Atlas. So there's this pillar keeping the two things separated so that we can exist. And if it ever got cut, then those two things would slam back together again, and we'd be trapped inside, and existence would basically be snuffed out. So what the Mithras myth is telling you is that he cut himself out of the womb, what the Saturn myth is telling you is about him cutting himself out of the womb, and that creates the world we're in. Well, if you just connect that to the story of Mithras cutting himself out of a rock, then you see that that's the same story. Basically, what we have with Kybele and Mithras, I think, are the story of that son who has to cut himself out, and also the story of the mother and what her experience was like in this whole thing. And together, those two creatures have influenced what became the entity known as Baphomet and the worship that the Templars engaged in, which, it seems to me, from my decoding, in particular of the artifacts put forward by Hammer Purgstall, that they were conducting this exact same ritual that I'm talking about. This was the baptism of wisdom. Okay, that common rendering of Baphomet's name is that it means baptism of wisdom. Well, they're referring to the ritual that I would say were practicing for. They weren't necessarily doing the real thing, because they were just warming up to it, trying to figure out how to do the real thing. But what it is doing a ritual to destroy creation and escape and become the gods of a new realm. So that's what I've been describing to you for this whole story, or for this whole conversation. This is what I think the Templars were involved in, and what I think Baphomet, their deity, was instructing them on how to do through divination. They said that they talked to Baphomet and he gave them wisdom. This is what I think they were telling him how to do. This is what I think he was telling them what to do and how to do. And this is the meaning, I think, of Templar Baphomet worship. And I think that there's several groups today that are still trying to do the same thing.
Yeah, you've written extensively on this topic in your book, Baphomet, The Temple Mystery Unveiled, I believe is the title, right?
Yes.
And, but the last thing, Tracy, that I want to touch on before we go here is diamonds. You write about diamonds in your book, Genuflect. You've also written a couple blog entries that relate back to this symbolism of the diamond and how it relates to Superman, for example, how it relates to Bloomberg, how it relates to even this crystalline sun that you touched on a few minutes ago in your explanation there. So I was just wondering if you could tell us a little bit about the importance of the diamond and how it plays a role in your story, and then also how it plays a role in our reality.
Well, I think that the best way to think of it is the metaphor I keep using about the deck prism, which is an object that they used to put in ships in the floor of the deck, so that below deck the light would shine through this crystal that's embedded in the floor of the deck. Sunlight and moonlight would go through, and then it would be amplified and refracted into the whole room. So it's an artificial light source, but it's simple and natural, not dangerous in any way, because, there's no candle, there's no open flame, there's no electricity. So the reason why I use that as a metaphor is because what I'm talking about here is the idea of the hyper-Uranian sun. It's something they imply in Freemasonry, and they hardly ever really go into detail about it, but it's in all of their symbols. And then it's something that you hear a little bit about in Greek philosophy, like Plato used to talk about this sometimes. And then there's a few other occult traditions in modern times where they'll talk about it. It's the sun beyond the sun and the sun beyond the fixed sky. Again, to understand the kind of stuff that I've been talking about in this whole interview, you really just have to throw out your disbelief for a minute and try to adapt the more ancient worldview that is only the stuff we can see that exists. So you're not thinking about anything that's been revealed by the Hubble telescope or any of that stuff. You're just thinking about, like I was saying before, the classical planets that occupy the heavens above us. And then you've got the fixed sky, the realm of the fixed stars, as being one thing, one realm in itself, called Uranus. So anything beyond that is hyper-Uranian. You've got these 7 steps. The last step is Saturn. And then the realm beyond that is Uranus. Anything beyond that, hyper-Uranian. And it really is, Uranus is like the ceiling. And if you were to think of it that way, if you had no other information to go on, then you would almost have to conclude that the sun and all the stars, all the other lights in the heavens, are bringing in light from something on the other side of that canopy. So it's just like a deck prism. And the sun then would be the main one. So what I'm talking about is the idea, yes, that the sun actually is a crystal that is bringing in light from beyond the sky. Now, they seem to quite literally depict this in Masonic symbols when they have the symbol of the royal arch and the keystone. So you'll see an arch, and quite often they'll just actually show you the zodiac signs on the arch. So you can tell it's exactly what I'm talking about. The arch of the sky, the fixed heaven, the fixed stars, Uranus, that realm. And in the middle of it, where the keystone would go in an arch, in architecture, in a building, they have their keystone, which they always represent with an I on it, or a G, or, the square and compass, one of those central Masonic symbols. They'll put that on the keystone. And sometimes they actually show the keystone removed. It's just been plucked out like a plug from a bathtub. In that case, they always show a sun, an additional sun, because you usually have the sun and the moon on either side of the arch represented. But then there'll be another thing, another light source that looks very much like the sun, usually a little bit bigger, shining through the hole in the arch where the keystone has been removed from. So what they're showing you is that there's a window in the sky, a little plug, a little portal, a hole, and if you unplug it, then the hyper-Uranian light from the sun beyond the sky can come through. And so in my novel, we have this as one of the scenes. And, I'll just say that, I envision being able to see things that you wouldn't see in normal light. In my story, doing this has a sort of, it's being done very literally in a way that everyone can see, and it's having a very literal, physical effect on the world. But I think that the symbol maybe represents something that they can do even on a smaller scale. They being the Freemasons in their private rituals in their lodge, could do something to open up a smaller portal and let some of this light in for whatever purposes they use it for. But I think that they're showing us a secret, something that they know about our world that we're oblivious to. I think it's real. So anyway, yeah, I put this in my story, and I don't know what else to say about it, because it's like, you may just laugh at it, or you may think it's the most brilliant thing ever, and it kind of depends on how seriously you take modern science and space research, and whether you believe in that stuff or not. Because otherwise, this is just sort of a metaphor, and it's, vaguely useful for literary purposes and nothing else. But if you believe that something like this could be literally possible, then it's going to make you look at the sun a lot differently, and in fact, your world a lot differently. I take it seriously, and I take the idea that God could be a stone quite seriously. Like I was saying, that's the way he's described in the book of Revelation. And I don't see any reason why spirit can't be inside of a stone. Why would you need flesh and blood to be alive necessarily? I think that spirits just need some place of residence, but they don't necessarily need, everything that we have for our physical existence. So they could very well be inside of something that seems to us to just be a crystal. It seems like, dead matter, but really you could have a spirit inside, which is something that people who are into crystals and, people who believe in the healing power of crystals and stuff like that. Well, this is what they're believing, that there's a spirit inside the crystal, and also that it can be used to communicate. And that's exactly what I'm talking about. One, that you could have something inside of it, which I've been told on the Ouija board. I don't know if it's true or not, but I've been told that Jesus is inside the sun and the sun is a crystal. And that's the real reason why he's associated with solar symbolism, that he's really actually being crucified now, and he's on the sun cross. He's being tortured for our benefit now. The sunlight that comes out is from him. That the symbol of the Sacred Heart, for instance, is just a way of showing you this, that his energy is being bled out upon us and we're benefiting from it. And it takes the form of the light from the sun. So I can see that could just be a metaphor, but I also have the ability to see ways in which it could be very literal. And I take it seriously in that sense. I tend to do that. I tend to look at mythology, and my first instinct is to see how they could actually be telling the truth. And any sort of metaphorical usage that can be made of it is usually something secondary. That yes, you can make it into a metaphor for, morality or some other thing that you might want to use it for. But usually when you look at an ancient myth that has a lot of weird, peculiar, very specific details to it, usually they're trying to tell you something very specific and real. And so I usually take that interpretation first. And that's what I see when I look at all of the myths about the sun. And, I said earlier in this story I talked about how it seems like there's stories of the sun being killed and replaced. Yes, that's what you see in all of the creation myths, and in the Greek stories. They talk about all the different ages of, starting off with the golden age of Saturn. And then, there was a silver age and an iron age and all these other less evolved ages coming after that. Well, anyway, they're talking about different eras of different suns. I don't think at all. I guess now I have a hard time even thinking of the sun as some, atomic explosion in the sky. I just don't. It's been a couple of years now that I haven't even had that thought. It doesn't occur to me anymore. Especially now, again, I don't want to branch off into too much, but I mean, the sun is totally different to me now than it used to be a few years ago. And it fits more this definition of being a crystal than it ever was before.
Just one more thing here. I mentioned the diamond symbolism and Superman, which is in your book. That's an interesting story, I think, that if we could just wrap up on that and how it relates back to everything that we're talking about here, because, Superman is an interesting character because when you look at just even overtly, it seems to symbolize this alchemical process, with the red and the yellow coloring. And I was just curious, how you saw that and how that relates back to the diamond symbolism and this artificial sun, perhaps.
Well, I'll throw in a few things because there's quite a lot I could say about that, which amazed me. I started writing about the Superman diamond just it was a accident. I was trying to come up with something to say about this plot of land that Bloomberg's building is on in London, which in my story for Genuflect, I have a character based on Bloomberg, and he's right there in that same place. So in other words, I changed the details for my novel just slightly, and almost everything is, based on reality. And the reality is that the plot of land that Bloomberg's building is on, it's this place called Bucklersbury. And this is the place where the Temple of Mithras originally was, supposedly thousands of years ago in ancient Rome, or Roman Londinia, the Roman city of London. And it looks like a Superman diamond. It has that particular shape. And so I started writing about that because I couldn't figure out what else to call it. I mean, I looked and looked for the name of this particular diamond shape, which you see, if you ask a child to draw a diamond, they'll probably draw this shape because it's what people think about now when they think of diamond. But it's specifically the Superman logo, or it seemed to me like that was the only thing to call it. So I started talking about that in my story, and I was just trying to find something to add to it. I mean, what could be the symbolism of the Superman diamond? And so, I started writing about the name Superman, how, both the way Nietzsche used it and the way Aleister Crowley used it, because he was probably the first person to use it in English, the word Superman. And they were talking about a superhuman race to come in the future. Well, Nietzsche was talking about a race to come in the future, and Crowley was talking about breeding a divine being through sex magic. But they're both kind of related concepts. So one of the first things I mentioned is, it kind of looks like a womb. It looks like a female pelvis. And I brought up the fact that Superman always wears his underwear on the outside. He wears those yellow panties that kind of look like
yeah.
Drawing attention to that part of his body and to that shape. So I first mentioned that, and I started making use out of that in the story. Then it all became much more complicated because I was already utilizing the fact that next to Bloomberg's building in the same location of Bucklersbury, next door you have the Bank of England and also the ancestral family home of the people that have always controlled the Bank of England, which is the Rothschilds. So there's the Rothschild family building right there next to him. And it's been there since like 1805 or something. And, their family lived there for the longest time. Their children would be born there. They lived there forever. Now it's just an office building. But like I said, it's been there for 200 years. And, these are the people that have financially controlled England and therefore by extension, the whole British Empire, everything that implies. And now they control all sorts of banks and essentially the finances of countries all over the world. Well, the seat of power was right there in this one spot in the city of London. And as I discovered, there's a connection with Superman. So here's what it is. For one thing, Lois Lane is based on a woman that the person who wrote Superman, his name's Jerry Siegel, who came up with the original comic strip. He used to be in love with this woman whose last name was Rothschild, and that was in his high school. And so the character of Lois Lane is based on her. And it does not say in any of these articles that are about this subject that she's part of this banking family. But just if you know the history of the family, well, they came up with the name. It was a German name. They changed it a little bit. So the family name comes from them. So she's got to be related somehow. Maybe not by blood. Maybe there's a marriage connection in her family's past that gave her the name. But one way or another, she is connected. And then, of course, I start to think, well, heck, the Rothschilds, don't they kind of control the diamond industry? Them and De Beers and what's his name? Cecil Rhodes. Those were the main figures in the diamond industry. And nowadays, Rothschild's probably the biggest. So there's that going on in my head and stuff. And then I find out what the Rothschild's family's name actually comes from and what it symbolizes. So it means red shield. And almost everybody will tell you that it's a red coat of arms with a hexagram on it, a Jewish star that they had in their shop window. Their ancestor did, their forefather, when he first opened up his shop where he was doing money lending and other things. But it's right except for what was on the sign. So it wasn't a Jewish star. It was a buckler, which is a kind of shield, a small shield that kind of looks like a cone, I guess, or a half of a circle, but it comes to a point at the end, has a kind of sharp point at the end. And honestly, I can compare this to the culet of a diamond, which is the bottom part. It's pointy, but it's also kind of rounded at the end at the same time. But the buckler is actually the red shield their name comes from. But I don't think it was just a metal shield to be used in battle. I think it was something more specific, and here's why. I think the buckler that they used as their family symbol actually was all the same as this talisman that they were said to have had. Particularly Nathan Rothschild, they said, had possession of this talisman that gave him power to be, quote, to become the Leviathan of finance. So he had a magical stone, they said. And diamond, of course, is the hardest stone. The word actually comes from adamant or adamantine. It means, hard, that you can't break it. So that goes along with the symbolism of a buckler, something that is a shield. And that even goes along with the idea of a diamond as a deck prism, because not only does the diamond deck prism in the sky bring in light from the hyper-Uranian sun, but it also acts as a filter for that light. So it's only bringing in the light we can use. It's protecting us from the wavelengths that are harmful. So this is the kind of thing that I think the Rothschild family symbol actually denotes, which is this magical object that they've used throughout their generations to make their family powerful. And it just so happens that they chose a location to base their empire in England, in the city of London, on this place called Bucklersbury. And it just so happens that landmass is shaped specifically like what became the Superman diamond. And it just so happens that Superman is in love with a woman that is named after a Rothschild, that is based on a Rothschild. And it just so happens that I wrote a story about an alchemical ritual happening right there in that very location where they're breeding a race of Supermen. And it just so happened that the diamond that we call the Superman diamond, that I've been calling the Superman diamond, well, what that shape really is something that was invented in the 1920s called the perfect round brilliant cut diamond. And it's the most perfect way of cutting a diamond so that it will refract light into a rainbow with the greatest volume of light and the most perfect colors. And they call that fire when you shoot light into a diamond and then it comes out sparkling and scintillating through the top. That's called fire. And in my story, they actually use that as a way of cutting open the sky. So in my story, the diamond that is the sort of family heirloom to the Rothschilds is also this thing that's kind of important to the whole world, as that it can act as a deck prism. That it has the power to be the new sun doing the same thing that the sun is presently doing. And it's cut in the shape of a perfect round brilliant diamond. Now, even though that was something that was only invented in the 1920s, in my story I have it that's actually a secret that has been passed down, through initiated alchemists for centuries. And I just made that up, but it is kind of the thing that I think happens a lot. I think that a lot of our technology is based on things that have been around a long time, but just kept secret. So it could even be that this cut of diamond is one of those things. Again, I don't know if it's true or not, but I got a lot of very interesting messages on the Ouija board about the diamond, kind of confirming that idea that the round cut brilliant diamond is an alchemical secret that has been passed down. And I also just got a lot of clues kind of handed to me through fate and through coincidence, where evidence was brought to me over and over again, and still always pointing to this idea. And actually, it's a very specific idea. What it is that the shape might have been discovered by John Dee. And John Dee, he wrote one of his most important alchemical manuscripts called Monas Hieroglyphica while he was in Antwerp, Belgium. Belgium is where this cut of diamond was invented. And in fact, that's really the center of the diamond trade in the world. And it always has been. And we got messages on the Ouija board about Belgium, specifically the city of Ghent. And one of the most important things, one of the most famous things in the city of Ghent is this thing called the Ghent altarpiece that's there in the Cathedral of St. Bavo, also called St. Boffs. And so, long story short, the saint of that cathedral, his name is kind of like Baphomet's name, and etymologically they're even directly connected. And then the Ghent altarpiece, that is the main piece of artwork that cathedral is famous for, and really the whole city is famous for, shows the sun in the New Jerusalem, and it shows all these crepuscular rays coming out of it, and they totally look like the shape of the cuts in a diamond. It looks like it's being refracted very directly out of a diamond. So I think that the message is embedded there. Oh, and another thing an interesting thing about Ghent, their whole symbol, the town symbol is a goat, and they have a festival every year called the Goat Parade, where they celebrate the symbol of the goat and his connection to St. Baph's. So I totally think there's a Baphomet connection to that city, and that it has that city is somehow the place connected to this diamond that I'm talking about, and this diamond magic or this diamond alchemy that I think exists, and the secret has been passed down for generations. And I think the Rothschilds are part of it, and that's why they have buried beneath several layers of symbolism a reference to it in their own coat of arms, where they have the buckler. And I guess I'll stop there, but I mean, there's a lot to say about those subjects. The Rothschilds, Superman, and the diamond, they're all connected, and there's so much to say about it.
Yeah, there definitely is. But one more just small detail about John Dee and his connection to diamonds in general, too, was that number 58 that you mentioned in one of your blogs, where I think you pretty much accused John Dee of being the demiurge. But
yes.
The whole, he had started writing the Monas Hieroglyphica on 1/25, January 25th, finished it on 3/31, March 31st. And those numbers, 25 and 33, correspond to that round, brilliant cut of the diamond that you were talking about, right?
Yes, and it corresponds to a number that was written on one of the Baphomet heads that was confiscated when the Templars were arrested. This is written in the logs of all the materials that they confiscated from their temples. One of them is this head called Head 58. So for a long time, I've written about the number 58 as being sort of a code for Baphomet. And so I was fascinated to find out that that's the number of facets that are in this diamond. And only if you count the culet, which is, like I said, this rounded thing on the end of the diamond. And one of the other interesting things that I've noted recently in connection to the number 33 and this diamond, the UN's logo, okay, they have the world depicted as an azimuthal projection from the North Pole. So everything that's in the world on the map is all spread out in a circle with the North Pole in the center. And then they have it cut up into 33 sections. There's like a grate that's put on top of it, and it has 33 sections. And of course, people have always thought, well, this has to do with Freemasonry, but why do the Freemasons use this? Here's why. Because there's 32 points on a compass, on a regular compass, with, the 4 cardinal directions. They'll divide that up into degrees so that there's 32 degrees. And of course, there's 32 official degrees of Scottish Rite Freemasonry. But there's an honorary degree that they give to some called the 33rd degree. And in fact, a lot of people will even say, well, it doesn't even exist. It's a secret thing, and only a few people are initiated into it. Well, that's one way of putting it. But the point is that you've got 32 compass points that are real on the known compass that measures the known world of 3 dimensions. But if you add an extra one, a 33rd degree, it's like you're saying, well, there's more beyond. There's plus ultra. There's a compass point pointing up in another direction that you didn't even know existed. And so I think that's what's implied with the number 33 and the structure that they have in Freemasonry. I think it's interesting that they have 33 segments then on the UN flag, or the UN symbol, where they seem to be covertly telling you about the extra territory that exists in the world. Then you have this diamond where, yes, there's 33 facets, but one of them is curved at the bottom where the North Pole would be represented. if you were to look at the diamond as a representation of a map, because it's the bottom, everything below the pavilion, the bottom half of this diamond, that's what has 33 on it. So if you turn it upside down and look at that bottom half as a representation of the world, just like the UN logo, they're showing you 32 segments, just like there's 32 compass points. And then there's an extra one in the middle that's curved. So it's like it's telling you another dimension, another way of looking at space. What looks like an angle is actually curved. That's the extra thing. That's the mountain, the invisible mountain, and you can't see the apex of the mountain because it's up there in the other dimension. So all this stuff connects in an amazing way. And I think I've only begun really to understand the meaning of this diamond. I may have to explore it in a future novel because it's like so complicated that if I start just writing nonfiction articles about this and putting it out, yeah, it'll be taken seriously and other people will start repeating it. It will become a phenomenon all its own, but everyone will think I'm crazy. But if I put it in a novel, I think I can get away with it. So that may be what I do. But I mean, I'm telling you, I can see all this stuff. I just don't know. I don't know if the world's ready to accept it yet. I hope you understand what I've been saying and how I see what these symbols are pointing to.
Well, I've been trying to understand it. Yeah, absolutely. There's just so much there. There is definitely a lot more further beyond here for sure. So, but I think that's a good place to wrap up on. Do tell people where they can keep up with you and your work.
TracyTwyman.com will always work. You can always follow that and find out what I'm doing. I may have various websites that I work on here and there, but if you just go to that URL, you'll always be able to find whatever my website is these days. And of course, if you want to find my books, you can always go to Amazon. Go to my website and find links to the books. But if you just go to Amazon, you'll find the books themselves. So that's what you should do.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, Tracy Twyman, thanks again for being here. I really do appreciate your time. You are a valuable, knowledgeable resource that I just can't get enough of. I just love hearing you talk, and it was nice to actually hear you on Skype on the other end of this.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
My fucking lord, Tracy Twyman is such a badass. My apologies again for the audio. If you made it to this point, you are a badass as well. And my apologies for not really following up on some points Tracy made.
All right, Higher Side Chatters, as we deal with the whirlwind of digital distractions and do our best to navigate the choppy waters of the conspiracy, one thing we do know is that the reality we have before us today was crafted from the top down a long time ago. From the international money magic spell and the life essence suck that is the all-important J-O-B, to the ways we think about matter, consciousness, technology, and the upper limits of what might be possible in this human energy farm we call home. Meanwhile, we hear about breakaway civilizations that might be far further ahead than the technological hamster wheels we peons get by on. We know secret societies have held back their own sacred knowledge for decades, and we've seen a long history of scientists who've stumbled off the pre-approved path, suppressed and marginalized. But what if things like the sacred knowledge of these secret orders, the all-seeing eye on the dollar bill, and the mysterious and elusive 33rd degree of Freemasonry all mean something far stranger than we'd ever thought? Possibly unlocking hidden doorways and portals to spaces between the worlds where the elite can not only indulge in every luxury and extravagance, but are also able to rule from a place that is truly untouchable. Well, these are the fresh, provocative ideas pouring out of today's guest's latest work, and I can't wait to get more into it. You know Tracy Twyman well by now as she graces the THC digital stage for a fourth time. Tracy first talked to us about her insights into the elite and their connections to dark entities through her own communication with entities such as Baphomet, largely covered in her book Clock Shavings. She then told us about the secret rites of the Knights Templar and their alchemy of finance, which she talks about in her book Baphomet, The Temple Mystery Unveiled. And in her third appearance, we talked about her latest book, a novel called Genuflect. We got into the cult of Mithras and that the elite of today still treasure some very old traditions. And the evolution of these ideas is exactly what we're getting into this time. The revealer of secrets, the teacher of myths, and a true thorn in the side of those pesky occult controllers. Tracy, welcome back to the Higher Side.
Thank you so much. It's nice to be back.
Cheers to that. I always love having you here, and the latest stuff you've been expanding on, given the content of Genuflect, is just right up my alley. I have always been interested in the idea of hidden worlds or land masses that used to be in the record but have moved off of more modern maps. And the threads you've been covering that suggest that these hidden places or maybe even multi-dimensional spaces could be the secret of secrets within something like Freemasonry is a very new take on some old material, and you make a great case for it. Maybe to get the people's mental gears oiled up and moving in the right direction, remind us of how these ideas are expressed in Genuflect and maybe the things you've seen in the world lately that mesh with it, as we're closing in on it being out for nearly a year now, I think.
Well, I definitely had hidden worlds as a feature in the novel Genuflect, although it doesn't really become clear that that's what's going on until you get towards the end of the novel. It's about alchemical processes that can change the actual outer world. And really, it's about the idea that we're living in the result of an alchemical process. I don't expect all of the listeners to know anything really much about alchemy, but when you think of alchemy, you think about a bottle, right? Like a vase type object where they would do their chemical transformations. If you've seen any of the alchemical images that abound from medieval times and early Renaissance period, that's kind of the idea, was that we are living in the result of what an alchemist did to create this world. And then that someone might be able to do the same kind of thing to get out of this world and then create their own. Really, I got that idea out of the alchemy texts themselves, where they're hinting at that. I had the novel set during this time period when you and I are talking. We're talking in the last week of March, and this weekend is going to be Easter and also April Fool's Day. And I took advantage of that in my novel, where that's the time in which the characters are doing an alchemical occult ritual tied into the rites of Kybele worship from Rome, an old Persian / Roman cult, and also tied into the rites of the Templars. And they're doing a ritual to open up a portal between our world and a higher realm. There's all sorts of symbolic reasons why this ties into Easter, this type of ritual. The idea is that we're in an alchemical vessel and there's a real outer world outside of that. In the novel, I don't want to give away too much, but basically the rituals that they do at Easter time have an effect on the outer world, and some of the things that become visible to people in our world as an effect of the ritual include all of these anomalies in the sky, such as changing color of the sun and the moon, also two suns visible at the same time. And then there's spheres. The planets actually become balls that come down from the sky, and in some cases one of them ejects a fluid down into the River Thames, and the other one drops down a golden chain from its body. And all these weird things are seen happening in the sky. What's really strange is that I only knew a little bit really about some of the things that people have been seeing lately in the sky over the last few years. When I wrote the novel, I didn't know that much about what was out there. Since finishing the novel, I've learned a lot more, and I've seen a lot of it myself. What I'm talking about is the change of the color of the sun, and the sun blinking, which has been seen a lot lately, and a black dot in the middle of the sun is seen a lot. A lot of this stuff really resembles stuff I had in the novel and stuff that you see in alchemical texts, alchemical drawings, and they're always really cryptic. You wouldn't be able to tell at first glance what it's communicating, but a lot of them do show multiple suns, changing color of the sun, and the heavenly bodies ejecting things into or pouring down stuff from their bodies onto the earth. The strange thing is, of course, that people have always taken those to be symbolic of various things, chemical processes and even spiritual processes. I decided to take a literal approach in my novels to actually have those things happening on Earth. And I think that was the right approach to take, because it's become clear to me since writing that story that I think we do live in an alchemical vessel. I mean, we've talked before about flat Earth theories, and some people think we're basically in a snow globe. I think that may be true, very literally, that we're in one of these vessels, and the chemtrails. I mean, I found alchemical images from hundreds of years ago with cloud formations inside of the vessel that look very similar to what people are seeing in the skies now. And people have been thinking for a while that they're trying to cover up something in the sky. In my novel, I had the sun being an artificial object, a diamond actually, and that it's coming through a hole in the sky and filtering what I called hyper-Uranian light from beyond our universe. There's a hole in our universe. The sun is like a crystal that plugs up that hole, acting as a deck prism and letting this higher frequency light from outside of the box that we're in. It filters it and lets it in, and that's the sunlight that we see. So that's the kind of imagery that I had in the novel. And I'm realizing more and more that I think I was kind of close to reality. And the stuff that people are seeing this week and more broadly over the last few years in the sky, it just freaks me out how similar it is to the stuff I had in my story.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, it is interesting. A lot of people are examining the whole environment, looking at the moon and the sun as possibly artificial. And I mean, that's pretty provocative. I also kind of wanted to read this from your latest article because you talk about our buddy Crow and his lunar wave stuff,
yeah,
which might relate to this because you write, YouTube star Crow 777 has realized that the lunar wave he's been filming on the surface of the moon every vernal equinox for years is actually the gate of the souls of men opening up, the gate through which we ascend and descend for earthly incarnation. He has also figured out that these gates are physically connected to the tropics of Cancer and Capricorn, and that these are among the secrets encoded in Masonic tracing boards. He also says that authorities and experts are lying about when the equinoxes are actually occurring. Lunar waves are occurring on nights of equal day and night, which he says from observation are presently occurring on different days at different places around the world, according to empirical observations of his listeners. So, provocative stuff, and it is very timely for this week, as you mentioned. Maybe the moon or the lunar wave is some kind of time marker or gateway to this realm, just as the sun is. Is that kind of the suggestion, that this is all some kind of artificial construct, like a slaughterhouse we aren't aware of?
Yes, and I don't know where you draw the line even between artificial and natural. If the world is created by God, then it's God's artifice. But I think it's just we imagine the world being, I guess we have our own ideas, our own definitions of what's natural and what isn't. So when we finally start seeing the mechanics of how it's built, we start seeing the edges of the box, then we feel like there's something unnatural about that. But maybe we could just say whoever created this is the God of this world, or the demiurge, he's the one who created this stuff. And I don't endorse any particular model, but I'm pretty convinced at this point that we have not been told the truth about the limits of our known world and universe. I honestly do not believe what we've been told about the history of space travel. I don't know to what extent any of it is true, but I think that there have been enough holes punched in the official claims about everything from the Apollo landing to the alleged missions that are occurring right now in space and everything we've supposedly learned from that. I think the holes have been punched, and so the authorities have been proven to be liars, and then we're just sort of left to try to figure out everything on our own from there. And it does help, I think, to go to older texts. And I also think that historical chronology is questionable, so I don't know what to say exactly about what is the most reliable text, but we can definitely say that, before we were born, at some point, our ancestors had a different understanding of the world around them. The idea of there being gates in heaven, one which souls come into this world, incarnation through, and one which they exit out of, well, that wouldn't have been too weird of an idea to our ancestors. And the idea that the sun and moon kind of act as doors to those portals appears to be throughout all kinds of Greek and Roman and Sumerian and other types of what we call ancient mythology. And you can also see it encoded even in Christian scripture and stories. Then it's all over Freemasonry, of course. And I find those tracing boards to be very valuable, at the very least showing you what whoever designed those tracing boards believed. I honestly do think we're looking at an accurate portrayal of the kind of world we're in.
Yeah.
Because the types of tracing boards I'm talking about are the types that show 3 pillars. It's common to see 2 with an eye in between them. You'll see this almost as a logo all over the place. The 2 pillars that are supposed to be the 2 in front of Solomon's temple, so Yakin and Boaz. And they're supposed to represent these 2 polar opposites, male and female, and mildness and severity, or mercy and judgment. Being hard and being soft, basically, right?
Right.
Then there's a third option there. And this really corresponds also to the Kabbalah, the Tree of Life. On that diagram of the universe, in that particular mystical tradition, there's 3 pillars holding up what they call a tree, some kind of diagram of the different spheres of existence. And so you have the 2 pillars on the side, right and left, that correspond to Yakin and Boaz, like I was describing, but then there's one in the center. The ones on the right and left are shorter than the one in the center. The one in the center goes all the way from the total absolute bottom of the system, which is Malkut, to all the way to the top, which is the crown. The other 2 pillars don't go all the way to the top, right? You have to take a detour in order to get up to the top. My point is, the pillar in the middle is the only one that will take you all the way from the bottom to the top. That's the main elevator shaft.
Right.
Whereas the other ones, they don't go as deep or as high, right?
Yeah, they don't go to every floor. And I just think that's such a fascinating idea, this concept of hidden hyperspace kingdoms, of places that are off the map, so to speak. And I know obviously this is an audio show, but when you look at those tracing board images you've pulled up on your website and the checkerboard floor, all the symbolism involved in the ladders that go to the sky, or the ladders that go to the sun, or the people coming out of the sun and filtering down to the Masonic tracing board. I mean, those images in the context of a secret space, or there being a room to a secret area, or you can unlock a portal with magic, it kind of makes sense in that new context. And it's just a really interesting idea. It also kind of ties into the 33rd degree you've talked about, the symbolism there, that on the typical compass, there's 32 degrees around the planet. In Masonry, there's 32 degrees, and then there's this honorary hidden 33rd degree, or, like, to use the elevator analogy, there's another level that the elevator in typical everyday consensus reality doesn't quite get to.
Yes, and as your guests in the past that talked about flat Earth probably pointed out, there's a azimuthal equidistant map that's the logo for the UN that flat earthers believe actually represents the real Earth. And in the UN logo, it's divided into 33 segments, and that 33rd segment is in the center where the North Pole is located. Now, mainstream geography says that there's nothing there except ice, but as you just mentioned, yes, the compass for spatial directions is divided into 32 degrees. Freemasonry has an honorary 33rd degree. I believe that 33rd degree can be thought of as representing the step to a higher dimension. I think that step to a higher dimension might be physically real and located in our world right there at the North Pole. And the reason why I think that is because there are ancient maps that put a mountain there called Rupus Nigra, meaning Black Mountain or Black Rock. It's associated with the myth of the World Mountain. That's the highest mountain in the center of the world. You find this archetype in all of the ancient traditions. And the idea is that this is the mountain of the gods. At the very top of the mountain, that's the Olympus realm, or the Eden realm, where the gods themselves actually live. But most people for one thing, they never get to go to the mountain, and then they never get to see the very top of the mountain. I think this is the same mountain that's described in Rosicrucian literature and in stuff published by the Priory of Zion, for instance, and by René de Maul, who's a surrealist writer. He only wrote one novel, really, but it's about this invisible mountain concept, the idea that there is a mountain that's taller than any other mountain in the world, but you can't see it. And the Priory of Zion described it as a mountain where you can't see the summit, except as a special day when the sun is hitting it in a certain way. The reason why, according to the Priory of Zion literature, and what I'm talking about is their poem Les Serpents Rouges that they put out, where they were describing this mountain. And they said that this mountain is where the hidden Temple of Solomon is located. I mentioned they said that you can see it when the light hits it a certain way at noon. Well, that's when the sun is at the very top of the sky. And that's when it's supposed to be putting out the whitest light it's going to put out. So it puts out pretty much pure white light at its meridian. And that's when, according to this poem, this special mountain can be seen. What I'm thinking is that, yes, I think that there is land on Earth that we can't see, but that perhaps those who are initiated or who have access to special information and maybe special technology, they can see it. And it's literally there. You might even be able to see it yourself in the right lighting conditions. So that's why I think you can see the mountain at noon if you're right up on it. And I think that there might be lots of other stuff that we can't see because the light isn't hitting our eyes in the right way. And I think that that's key. In the Masonic tracing boards that I'm talking about, the two pillars, they show sun on the left, moon on the right. So you got the moon and the sun on top of each one of the pillars usually in these Masonic tracing boards. But then there's a third luminary in the center. And that is represented variously, either as a sun that is bigger and brighter than the regular one, the one that's on the left, or it can also be shown as a hexagram or a square and compass or an all-seeing eye, usually inside of a triangle. Or sometimes it's just shown as the keystone itself. Usually when there's three lights, and usually there's three pillars in these instances too, there's an arch going between the first two pillars, right? So in the keystone position of the arch, that is the center, the keystone position, that's where this third light or luminary is represented, either there on the arch itself, right below it, or right above it. Now, sometimes they'll show the keystone and show it having been removed. And they'll show this luminary shining through the hole that's made in the archway. It's pretty obvious if you look at it, but if it's not obvious enough, the Freemasons actually spell it out in their own books, such as the Encyclopedia of Freemasonry by Albert Mackey. They talk about how the Masonic depictions of Solomon's Temple really are showing you the world and actually the universe. And he specified that it's the world as it was known in Solomon's time, or in other words, the old world, but it's also really the whole universe.
Right.
They're very cryptic, the Masons, about what all this means. But I have seen enough of these pictures and correlated them that I think I've figured it out. The arch is the firmament. The light shining on the outside, the third light that I'm talking about in the middle, is what I described in the novel as the hyper-Uranian light. It's this light that's thought of as preceding the existence that we're in, and it's outside of the firmament above, the dome that they say is protecting our world from the chaos or whatever it is that's outside. I think there's definitely wavelengths of light that are up there that we can't generally handle looking at. And I think maybe our sun does act as a filter so that we can have some of the light that we need, but we're not exposed to all of the wavelengths that are damaging to us. But I think that if you can safely use some of these other wavelengths of light, they might allow you to see some of these hyperdimensional things and these other land masses. And I think that that's what these tracing boards are showing you. For one thing, I've seen a Masonic image where it actually shows guys in a Masonic lodge doing divination ritual together around a table. And they've got the keystone removed so that the light is coming in from outside of the universe and it's pouring through a window into their lodge and then onto a mirror that they have set up in front of their table that they're working. The image from the mirror then bounces down from there onto this diagram that they have laid out on the table, and it's a Masonic tracing board. So they're bringing in the hyper-Uranian light, bouncing it off a mirror, and then it's illuminating things on a tracing board on the table in front of them. Tracing board of Solomon's Temple, which we've been told by the Masons themselves represents the world.
Right.
So that's one way of, I suppose, safely utilizing this light to see things and actually have it show you things on what's essentially a map. And I think that it could work in a much more straightforward way if the keystone literally did open, which I think may either be happening or maybe it happens periodically. But I mentioned before how people are seeing strange things in the sky, strange colors to the heavenly bodies. And then there's all of this chemtrailing, which seems to be the purpose to blot out the sun and to make us see less of what's going on up there. I don't know what exactly they're hiding, but the sorts of anomalies that people are describing seem to me like the kind of thing you would see if different wavelengths of light were suddenly getting through.
Yeah, I think this is a pretty amazing idea. And you are right. The sun is on the left and the moon is on the right in these images. And anyone can Google image search Masonic tracing board and see what we're talking about here. There are variations, but for the most part, you have the checkerboard floor and the left and right pillar, and then, of course, that central one. And whereas the sun and moon are on the sides, usually there's some kind of star or opening with light pouring through put over the third one, and a golden road with people coming out of it. And in a lot of cases, the ladder is placed diagonally over that third pillar, almost to symbolize a ladder to some kind of subspace. I mean, I can see it. And maybe this long history of Masonic teachers coming out to the public and saying it's all about higher levels of consciousness, or that the ranks of Masonry are just about enlightenment, it would be a good cover story, and not exactly a lie either. It is about higher knowledge, because only they know how to open the doors and get out of this place. Probably by magical means. And, the flat earth paradigm is very polarizing and not exactly my favorite model at this point. But if we're just trying to present the clearest case for your perspective, you could take the observer effect literally, and you could look at these tracing board images as more literal than most, and you have yourself a really enticing interpretation that is very unique, where you have Freemasonry saying in these images, hey, you're too dumb to realize you're in a spiritual prison, and a literal one. You stick to your 32-degree construct. We're the gatekeepers to the outside, whatever that is. And we only share that information with those who make it to the 33rd degree. We don't even admit that exists, which is another double entendre of symbolism. I know it's a bold suggestion, but I know I'm not going to be looking at these images the same way again.
Can I elaborate a little bit more?
Please, sure.
Okay. There's way more about hyperspace in those images if you just really, really look at them. One of the things is there's the three pillars, then there's usually a ladder going up to this gateway that I described, the hole in the sky. But the ladder is shown leaning up against nothing. So you wonder what's holding the ladder up. And I think it's a fourth wall. You don't see what the ladder is leaning up on because you're not seeing the other dimension that they're pointing to.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I've seen stuff like this happening recently. I know this is going to sound totally crazy, but one of the things I've seen when there's heavy chemtrailing in my area is what I've called non-Euclidean clouds. The clouds will actually bend the light and make everything look weird, where it's bending one way at the top and then bending another way at the bottom. And I've actually seen this horizon in the skyline look like it's just a flat wall in front of me. So I don't know what that means exactly, but I think it's tied into this, that if you could see the other dimensions some things that look like they go on into the distance, you might all of a sudden see walls in certain places.
Whoa.
The other thing that indicates hyperspace to me is the way the pillars themselves are arranged, because they're not equal distance apart like they are on the Tree of Life. This is a multidimensional picture, but the pillars are arranged in such a way that if it were made into a two-dimensional picture and you were looking from the top down, it would be a right-angled triangle. When you're looking at it from the front, when you're walking down the path that they usually show on these tracing boards through the first and second pillars, you wouldn't at first glance see the third pillar. It's off to the side a little bit, and that's the way they usually show it. In one of the tracing boards that I have, it is even like barely visible behind the right pillar. And that's just showing you that you have to look in a certain way at a certain angle, and the light has to hit your eyes in a certain way to be able to see what is between the first and second pillars. And what are the first and second pillars precisely? They are poles. And you know how I know is because there's actually always a directional compass put on the outside of the tracing board. And east is put at the top. And so the right and left pillars, the two that are in the front, those represent the north and south poles. And so this is showing you a third pole beyond the north and south poles. That is the higher dimension that we're talking about. I mean, it does exist. It has its own direction. It has its own space. We just don't have a compass that can include that. But it's just as real. It's not ephemeral. It's not just like something that is nebulous and doesn't mean anything. It has its own maps and terrain if you could find the right light to look at it with.
Man.
I think that's what they're telling you there. So
I love it. I love it. And you've been writing and thinking about things in this lane for a long time. And to approach it from a slightly different direction, we now in the past few months have this 4chan poster who's been getting a lot of attention, claims to be an insider who is very close to the president and goes by the moniker of QAnon. To be honest, there is no subject that's been requested more from the audience lately than an in-depth look at QAnon, and I've avoided it because I just don't want to jump on the trendy conspiracy stories that come out like this too early. I don't want to just go where the wind blows, and it's highly possible this is another in a long line of internet hoaxes. I'm not a huge fan of this Trump is a dark horse rising up to fight the New World Order narrative, and that is an aspect of the QAnon stuff. But I'm going to be open-minded, and disclaimers aside, I've looked at how a lot of people are covering QAnon, and you take it into these ideas that we're talking about, and I brought up in the intro, and you kind of relate it to your work in a way that's pretty mind-blowing. I guess, can you introduce Q to the uninitiated and talk about how it ties into the ideas that we're talking about?
Well, I'll do my best here. And I've got to admit, I have not had much time to look at what Q has been posting lately. But thumbnail, I guess, is that here's a guy who supposedly is on the inside of the Trump administration to the point where he's next to the president frequently throughout the day, plotting things in secret with him and other secret co-conspirators, supposedly. And he's painting a picture of a revolution happening within the elite. This is all stuff that's being released in the politically incorrect segment of 4chan. This is a website where people can post things anonymously, and that's why sometimes intelligence is dropped from whistleblowers on 4chan. But it makes more sense to go to WikiLeaks or someplace like that. But anyway, 4chan, you can actually have a discussion with people about it, I guess. And so that's what's going on. He's been dumping all of this information. Most of it is riddles and written cryptically. Some of it contains predictions, some of which have come true. Most of them haven't. It seems they haven't. And so I understand what you're saying about how you don't know whether to take it seriously or not. I don't either. I take it seriously. I guess I can say that, but I don't know what exactly to make of it. I do feel that the president is in on this. That doesn't mean that what Q is saying is true, because this could all be an elaborate psyop, which the president himself is in on. But I agree with you about wanting to be very cynical of the idea that he's any kind of hero, and especially that he's against the New World Order, but he's secretly hiding amongst them to try to fight them on the inside. That's definitely what Q wants you to think, to the point where he's sending out messages in response to Lynn Rothschild's tweets. And then it seems she's responding to him, and they're making death threats to each other and things like that. The thing that makes it seem like there's some legitimacy to the claim that it's originating from the president's office is that there have been things where the Q person said something in one of his messages, and then the president's own tweet used the exact same language within a couple of minutes of the post.
Mm-hmm.
So things like that definitely make me think that the president's office is in on it. But yeah, I don't know if it's true or not. The only reason why I really got involved in writing about it was just because it did seem to me like whoever Q is had been reading my website. Because they were talking about some of the stuff I was just describing about hyperspace, using cryptic language, using some of the same metaphors that I had been bringing up in my writings lately. And that made me think that me writing about some of these particular metaphors and symbols brought it out in the open and made whoever Q is feel like it's okay to talk about this now. What I'm talking about specifically about some of his code words, he keeps saying that we need to expand our thinking. He keeps referring to maps and really to territory that isn't featured on the regular maps. And most people think that this is a metaphor for something else. And they keep looking to current events and history, analyzing different conspiracy theories. They keep looking to Pizzagate stuff to try to correlate this. And then also, I guess there's some people who think that it has to do with North Korea and that North Korea is really a Potemkin village. It doesn't really exist. This is some stuff that's been hinted at by Q, that North Korea is kind of a puppet, pretend enemy built up by the CIA. And so some people think that the comments about the map are referring to that. But I think it's hyperspace kingdoms, things that aren't on the map because they're hidden from us. The whole thing started really right around the time that Trump went to Saudi Arabia and there was a change in power over there. A whole bunch of Saudi princes got arrested and their stuff was confiscated. So Q, when he first came out, one of the first things he was talking about really was that there's tons of resources the elite have tied up, and he was promising people they're going to take it and redistribute it, essentially. And that hit me right away as being relevant to what I was starting to realize, that if there's hidden territory, and God knows how much there is, well, you know, that's all got a real estate value. There's probably gold and diamonds there, and God knows what kind of technology and other types of resources we can't even imagine. And look at the conditions that we're living in here on Earth, where it seems like, you know, maybe we have enough resources, but definitely our monetary system is so effed up that they'll never be distributed to everyone that needs them. Every country is in debt. We're all slaves to these banks that seem to control everything, and there's only a few people in control of those. Well, what if what Q is suggesting is true, that those elites are all criminals, and there's really only a few of them. They have all these resources that we don't even know about. You know, he was saying, yeah, you think that you know who the richest families are. You don't know who they are. I mean, you don't know how much money they have, because whatever they get caught lying about on their taxes, well, that's just a fraction of whatever they're hiding from you.
Right.
So that was just the hint. When I started noticing that some of the code words seem to have to do with hyperspace. Oh, and don't they always say that people who believe he's a dark horse, they say he's playing 4-dimensional chess?
Mm-hmm.
That made me think this is what we're talking about. And then he started talking about Sleeping Beauty and telling people to look for Sleeping Beauty and her castle. Well, In the Priory of Zion poem, Les Serpent Rouge, that I was telling you about, where they describe the hidden mountain and the hidden Temple of Solomon, they also describe it as Sleeping Beauty's castle. If you think about it, it makes sense because that middle pillar in the Kabbalah is the same as that middle pillar on the Masonic tracing boards. That's the one that's hidden. It's sleeping because you don't see it usually. And in the Kabbalah, the name of the pillar in the middle is Hebrew for the word beauty. So, yes, I absolutely think the Sleeping Beauty references in QAnon are a reference to the middle pillar as the route that you take to get to the hidden hyperspace kingdom. Just like on the tracing board, they show often a path. Sometimes it's a ladder, like we were saying, leaning up against nothing. But sometimes it's a pathway. Kind of reminds me of the yellow brick road in The Wizard of Oz. But it starts out straight, and then it starts twisting. And it looks like it's going down in the beginning, and then it starts to go up. Right. So it's a non-Euclidean pathway leading up into a higher dimension.
And that was going to be one of my comments, that this does look like the yellow brick road to the technologically advanced and mystical city of Oz, but also that there are a lot of Disney movies that revolve around people, mainly kids, being transported to a different realm, and that is the hero's journey. But even just looking at the details of some of these tracing boards, I see images that look a lot like the tumbling down the rabbit hole scene in Alice in Wonderland. And then you have the kids from Peter Pan. They fly off to Neverland and they aim at a star that's shining just like these images. So it does make you wonder, maybe the Masons hold the key. And I was even thinking the other day about all the Masonic symbolism in DC, how America was called the New Atlantis. And then we have these weird systems of measurement that are separate from the metric system. And for example, water freezes randomly at 32 degrees.
Oh, yeah.
Like it's encoded to be the transmutation point, which is just sort of a weird tangent. But I bring this up because you talk about Disney in one of your videos. People dismiss the idea of him being a Mason, but apparently he was in the Desmoulins Society, which was a Masonic grooming organization for young kids. He seemed pretty well versed in the mysteries regardless, and Disneyland does have that elite Club 33. Maybe he knows something we don't. But to tie it all the way back to QAnon, let's talk about Tomorrowland, because as well as Sleeping Beauty, this was another Disney thing that he referenced, right?
Yes, he mentions Tomorrowland a lot, which I had only remembered being one of the sections in Disneyland. A couple years ago, they made a movie about it. George Clooney's in it, but that is about hidden hyperspace kingdoms exactly. It's about, okay, if this isn't creepy, especially after the Pizzagate stuff came out. All right. The story is that there's a hidden world where the elite hide their technology they don't think the world is ready for yet. And it's accessible through It's a Small World, which, okay, there's some symbolism there. We're in a small world compared to what the real world is.
Yeah.
The thing is, the kids that they decide are going to be kids are going to be initiated into the secrets of Tomorrowland. They choose kids that they think are especially intelligent, and then they give them a special lapel pin. They don't know what it means. Then they go on the ride, It's a Small World, and when they go past a certain point in the ride, a laser goes out and touches the lapel pin. And then once that happens, a gateway opens up, and then they go into Tomorrowland, where, you know, everything's flying cars and everything's the Jetsons' future. The point is, Disney touched upon this idea, spelled it out exactly, precisely what I was describing. And, you know, the real reason why I thought about it as being so specific and about it being a place where the elite of this world, this flesh and blood world, might hide to get away from the rabble, is because that's what the story is of Atlas Shrugged, right, and Ayn Rand wrote. And I think that had a lot to do with inspiring this Tomorrowland idea. It's very similar.
For people who aren't familiar with Atlas Shrugged, give us the details of the similar portion, because you are right, it's an exact match.
Okay, so again, the idea coming out of Ayn Rand's philosophy and attitude to life I think she was using the world analogy. The true story of Atlas is that he's holding up the sky. But since the world has been thought of as a globe for recent years, a lot of times when people see the image of Atlas holding up a globe, they think it's the world. And so people think Atlas holds up the world. He's supposed to hold up the sky. The metaphor still kind of holds. But the point is that she's comparing the elite to the ones holding everything up, keeping everything going, and that they're overburdened by that and by the problems created by regular people. Regular people are so stupid and needy that they're the ones ruining everything. So anyway, the world is a dystopian future in which the price of gas has gone up so high that people don't drive much anymore and there isn't much air traffic. And instead people take trains. And so the main character is in the train business. And the point is just that everything sucks because supposedly the government's been taken over by people with a liberal mentality. They're putting all of these unnecessary requirements on businesses and high taxes. Therefore, it's just too difficult to run a business and it's not worth doing anymore is the idea. That's why everything's falling apart. And so one of the guys in the story, and he's not even a business owner, he's just a mechanic at a shop, but he happens to be a genius. And he invents this free energy machine. And okay, I haven't finished reading the novel, so just a caveat there. It may very well be that it makes more sense in the novel than it did in the movie. Assuming that the movie is based on the novel, it's kind of weird because she's describing it as like a mini particle accelerator. And yet she's also saying that it's a Tesla device. And I just can't see those two things being the same object, but at any rate, it's a little tiny free energy machine. This guy, John Galt, makes it. And then right about the time that he's finished with it, he realizes that it's just not worth showing the world this thing. And he'd rather disappear and create his own world with people that he thinks are worthy of breathing his air, you know. And so he does that. And that's, you know, the main character starts the story discovering his hidden world. He creates one of these hidden worlds with his quantum technology or whatever it is. He creates a world within the Rocky Mountains that you can't see from the outside. And there's a force field around it. And she manages to get through with an airplane. Her airplane crashes through and she discovers this world. He has brought all of these people that he's chosen. He brings them one by one, John Galt does. He picks people that he thinks are worthy and going to contribute to his society. And he invites them to come to a place where they'll be rewarded for their efforts. And everything will be fair and based on merit. And one by one, every single one of these people chooses to leave the life that they have. And in some cases, their families. In most cases, their businesses. And they just disappear and nobody knows where they're going. But they're really going to this hidden world. And the name of the hidden world is Atlantis. So there's a number of reasons why she could have chosen that, stemming from Greek mythology, and Atlantis is named after Atlas. Supposedly it's a different Atlas than the one that holds up the sky, but I think they're the same. And I think Atlantis is the same kind of idea, the actual Plato story of Atlantis. I think they're describing a hyperspace situation there too, because I think they're describing the world that we used to have, the universe really, sort of dropping down into a dimension below our perception. And that's why the stories are a little bit weird. It doesn't really fit into chronology, and yet we all have a story about Atlantis or the flood. But that's sort of a side issue, but yeah.
I just think this is so fascinating, and I've been pretty critical of the flat earth perspective lately, but you know, regardless of that, one of the things people always say is, well, who cares? What would the motivation be to hide the shape of the earth? Well, that's what this whole conversation is. This is clearly a motivation. If this is a construct, some artificial reality, some slaughterhouse or terrarium, and only the 33-degree Freemasons have found the way out of it, I mean, we are in a zoo. We are in a prison. This whole economic enslavement model, the way the whole planet or whatever it is, the whole plane is under the influence of the elite. I mean, this is their playground for our consciousness, basically. This is our prison. I mean, this would be the biggest motivation of all. It makes a lot of sense. And you talked about, or you mentioned Tesla technology, and that is a huge thing to tie in here, because if we're going to try to bring QAnon, hyperspace areas, Freemasonry, and Trump all together, I mean, we know that John G. Trump was Trump's uncle was the guy who actually was responsible for looking over Tesla's material when they took it, when they confiscated it from Tesla when he died. This is not a secret. I mean, it's very public information that Trump's uncle was this guy. Well, maybe Trump's uncle learned in Tesla's documents about some of this very stuff. And maybe Trump does know about it. Maybe this QAnon stuff is related because, like you said, he does mention seeing the world differently from a high enough vantage point. He talks about maps and legends and keystones and the 40,000 feet number. He says, "What is SpaceX? Expand your thinking." That's a quote. This kind of is interesting, you know? I mean, you've even made a video talking about Mar-a-Lago and the fact that you can't get into that club without paying something like $100,000 a year. Well, what could go on there? Could that be a portal to one of these hyperspaces? You would never know unless you're going to fork over $100,000 to crack that inner circle. And what's worth $100,000? Do people get rich by giving their money away for no reason? I mean, usually they have to make some smart financial decisions to keep it all. You don't make money by giving it away. So what is of value at Mar-a-Lago for that price tag that you can't get anywhere at any nice resort? So there are some interesting aspects that possibly tie these things up, and maybe it relates also to Plus Ultra. That's a big can of worms, but go for it.
Yeah, no, Plus Ultra, yes, is a motto that actually appears in the tile work at Mar-a-Lago, and there could be any number of reasons for that. I mean, it's just a Spanish decor that they chose. So this is a Spanish origin phrase. Not necessarily Spanish origin. It's a Latin phrase, but it is really made famous because of its use on coins that were minted by the Spanish royal family around the time that they started colonizing the New World. And they found lots of gold and silver when they did that. And so they started minting lots of coins. Some of them got used by the colonists over here. In fact, those were the first dollars that were used, were actually Spanish coins. And they had this motto on them, Plus Ultra, with the two pillars, which represent the pillars of Hercules. And so the point of using that phrase on that coin, the phrase means there is more beyond. And so it's saying there's more to our empire, the Spanish royal empire, beyond the pillars of Hercules. There's more land, there's more stuff, more money.
Wow, to see that phrase popping up in such specific places is quite interesting.
So yeah, just as the two pillars of Hercules seem to represent to our ancestors, to represent sort of a boundary where they didn't know what was in the oceans beyond the two pillars. Well, here they can represent those same things as the two pillars on the Masonic tracing board, which, as I pointed out, that's the North and South Pole. So that designates the limits of the world that at least you and I can experience as non-astronauts, right? We can only experience things that are between the North and South Poles. Of course, we think of it as a sphere, so it's hard to even think of those two things as enclosing something, but that is the way that we need to look at it to understand this. And then the idea is there's something beyond that. Now, Plus Ultra also happens to be the name of the secret society in the movie Tomorrowland that runs Tomorrowland. And supposedly both Tesla and his arch enemy, Thomas Edison, were members of Plus Ultra together in the movie. That's what they say. That's interesting in itself. They're showing you members of the scientific elite we thought were enemies, but they're saying, oh no, they're really friends. If you actually go into the secret world where the elite live, actually they're buddies, which is just like what really happens at elite parties where people who are political enemies have sex with all the same prostitutes together. It's, again, a true depiction of what's really going on here. The funny thing is Plus Ultra is a phrase that I've used repeatedly in the past for things that I've done. So I had a website called Plus Ultra, and I had a podcast called Plus Ultra, and now I've brought it back, and that's the name of my premium content on my website. I've got videos and podcasts, and I call it Plus Ultra because that's going beyond the paywall, getting the extra stuff that the premium subscribers get. And it's an apt analogy. I don't feel bad about using it. I don't think this is some kind of dark concept. In fact, I think it's quite an exciting concept because it just means there's more stuff to explore. And just because the elite know how to use it doesn't mean that we can't learn how to use it too.
Right.
And I think we may very well be in a time period in which the veil is being lifted. We started off talking about the portals, which Pro 77 found that seem to be, at least there's one behind the moon and one behind the sun. And there may be another one somewhere in the sky. And supposedly those doors open at certain parts of the year. And I think this year we're seeing some special changes around this time in the sky, perhaps indicating that the veil is lifting, that different streams of light are getting into our system, and we're being allowed to see some of the extra stuff. I don't know how it's going to turn out. I hope it's a happy ending here. Right. But it does seem like the governments of the world are trying hard to hide it all behind a veil of artificial clouds.
Well, it definitely could be possible. I mean, this material ties into a lot of strange little threads that guests have brought up in the past. I mean, Walter Bosley, not only does he have a book, Latitude 33, about Disney being built specifically on a ley line for energetic purposes. Mm-hmm. I mean, you could be taking that way further, but it's a related idea. And he also talks about the Sonora Aero Club, which is a secret group from America's early days that involved Germans who seemed to be making these flying crafts that were well outside of the norm, way off the radar, technologically speaking, to what was being worked on. And there was a secret society basically built around the knowledge of these crafts. And what's strange is that Charles Delshow had drawings of these crafts, and on one of them, it says Trump right across the top. And this was before really? Trump was elected president. Yeah, I mean, this is crazy. I cannot get over that image. And I just think it connects so well. And so here you have Disney being built for a specific energetic purpose on a specific geolocation, and that Trump might be involved in a secret society that has higher technology. I mean, you mentioned Tesla and Edison being in this supposed club. I mean, what is UFO technology all about? Is electrogravitics. Maybe there's secrets of electricity that open these portal ways. Maybe that's what the Bermuda Triangle was all about. Maybe there's a natural one there. You could even look at Admiral Byrd's story and the Hollow Earth thing, where Admiral Byrd is flying over a pole and looking down and seeing green land that shouldn't exist. Well, maybe he's looking through one of those gateways. I mean, there are a lot of old stories that people have drawn conclusions to that are different. But if you walk those conclusions back and just look at the details of the story, you might be looking at a secret hidden hyperspace kingdom.
Yeah, and you were saying that there's reasons to be critical of flat earth theory. I said at the beginning, I don't have my own map to present to everybody and say, here's what the universe looks like from God's perspective. I don't know, because you would have to have that. See, if you've got more dimensions than we can see, then to have an accurate map, you would have to have the God position. So I don't have that, nor does anyone else drawing up their own map. But I think a lot of the things that have brought people to flat earth are just empirical observations of things that don't seem to fit with the existing mainstream map and diagram of how physics supposedly works and astrophysics. Well, it may very well be that there's holes in the official system, and this flat earth perspective fills some of those holes. And then it may be that there's some things that still don't get explained, or some things that just seem wrong if you totally take the flat earth perspective. And then there's a bunch of other people with variations. So there's people who have flat earth square map. And then there's some people who think that we're in a concave system where the ball is around us instead of we're on top of the ball. All of these things seem like they would harmonize easily in a hypercube.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a kind of a thing that you could criticize. You could say, oh, you're just making it something that's non-falsifiable, right? People criticize theoretical physicists. Every time there's a phenomenon that they can't fit into their current model, they'll just create another dimension or another imaginary subatomic particle to make up for whatever's missing in their theory. So maybe you could criticize me for doing that, but I do think it actually harmonizes everything quite well and also goes along with some of the symbolism that we see of the cube representing reality. I think there's tons of information about this stuff in Salvador Dali's stuff, particularly when he gets to the Christian material, like his Corpus Hypercubus, where he shows Jesus being crucified. And then there's several other depictions of the Virgin and of Jesus where, he's showing them in a hyperspace situation. But if we just look at Corpus Hypercubus, please, listeners, look this up. Basically what it is you can make a cube out of, I think, 13 squares, or you can make a hypercube, which is a cube within a cube, out of one of those. At any rate, you can unfold it then into a Christian cross. If you take all the squares and then flatten them out into a two-dimensional surface, it looks like a Christian cross. So what Dali did in this painting was he has Jesus crucified on a 3D cross, but it's made out of these little cubes because it's a hypercube unfolded. He's on the cross in the middle of space. There's an abyss of nothingness beneath him. And Mary, his mother, is watching him from the other side of that gap, that abyss of nothingness, and she's on top of a chessboard. Now, I can say a lot about that, but I won't. The idea of him being arched backwards on top of this hypercube. There's a cube that's even sort of poking into his back when you look at this Dali picture. So he's not flat up against the cross. He's curved a little bit because his body has to curve around this cube that's kind of poking into his back. Well, the way that Jesus looks there on the cross, curving backwards, his arms curving backwards, his head curving backwards, his legs curving backwards a little bit, it reminds me of the way that the Zodiac Man is represented in mystical literature, in Masonic literature, in ancient astrological writings. It's basically Ouroboros, but we're used to seeing Ouroboros as a serpent biting its own tail, and this is a man bent backwards completely so that his feet and his hands are touching, and he's encircling the cosmos. So he represents the zodiac, the outer rim of everything.
Yeah.
And I have a variety of reasons for coming to this conclusion, but I think that what Dali is showing us here is Jesus as the Zodiac Man, Jesus as the Leviathan unfolding everything, the Ouroboros. So therefore, the entirety of everything, the cosmos, and what's inside of that, it's a hypercube, unfolded. So I think that this may be one of the secrets of Freemasons and other mystical societies. It just really brings everything together. Because I think the people that have criticized the space programs and said that they think most of it is fake, I think they're right.
Agreed.
And then there's all this symbolism, though, of the missions themselves. Apollo 11, I mean, I don't want to get too dirty. The thing is that the symbolism is really sexual and kind of gross.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the rockets are just giant phalluses being shot out into the sky, and what our planet's supposed to be, but almost eggs. So you think of the moon landing, I mean, that is a penis penetrating or a sperm penetrating an egg. It's all that kind of symbolism.
Yes, it's a sperm penetrating an egg, and there's an even darker aspect to it, I think. This gets into the kind of sex magic that Aleister Crowley liked to do.
Hello.
And can you hear me?
No, yeah, I can. I know where it's going.
I'm going to try to tone it down here a bit.
That's okay.
Okay, and this is all in genuflect. If you want to read more about the concept I'm about to give you a sketch of, we're talking about the anal birth of the homunculus. So Crowley believed that there was a magical way of conceiving what he called a magical child, something greater than human, by impregnating a man's anus. And he had lots of different ways of representing this in his writings. And the number 11 was one of them. There were several reasons for this. One of them just had to do with the fact that he thought it looked like two penises standing together.
There you go.
He thought the homo sex was just better than anything with a woman. He really just hated women a lot. And so he came up with all sorts of mystical reasons why he thought men were better and that you could even breed with a man and you didn't need a woman at all. The thing is that a lot of the guys in the early space program were influenced by these ideas, and I think they were all hoaxing their asses off. So these ideas made their way into the movie productions that they produced and passed off as actual moon missions. So the number 11 for the one that actually reached the moon, I totally think that that was connected to the idea of penetrating the moon, which is also another representation of an ass. You know, we call it mooning someone when you take your pants off and show them your butt, right?
That's true.
Gosh, I had an article that I started where I started listing off all these things because I know there's tons more. There's all these references inside the details of the lunar landing, the first Apollo missions, that indicate that it was kind of a ritual pertaining to this idea of anal conception of a divine homunculus. So why am I mentioning that? Well, because not only are we in a hypercube, but all the mystical literature and all of our ancestors' mythologies so frequently get into the idea that we're living inside of a giant body of something. And in fact, then there's all of the things around us. A lot of them are the bodies of this or that thing, this or that god, or, mega being of some sort. And even, Greek mythology just starts off with heaven and earth were one being, and then they got split apart. So the sky is a living being, and the earth is a living being. That's the idea. And then when they got split apart, as part of the process, the sky got castrated. And the sky is called Uranos. That's the heaven god, supposedly, according to the Greeks, Uranos. But a lot of things about Uranos, including just the word itself, I believe it's the same thing, the same concept as Ouroboros. I think when you talk about the perfect man, the same as Ouroboros, you're seeing Uranos after he's been castrated, and they always show him, like I said, bent backwards. So we're on the inside of this man who's been castrated and bent backwards into a circle. So that means that when we look up, one of the things that's in the sky is his rear end. And the other side of him, where his genitals were cut off, that's pointing upwards on the other side of the cosmos that we can't see. So, two things here. One, then the idea of the moon being the buttocks of Uranus becomes possible, literally. Then you also bring into question, well, what happened to the severed phallus of Uranus? So the Greeks say that it fell into the ocean and there was semen on it already, and that generated the goddess Venus. There's other stories in Greek mythology that I think tie in and are like a continuation of this story. The idea is that it definitely didn't just go nowhere. It fell and it did something, and it generated other beings. I know we're running out of time here probably, so I don't have time to get into everything that I think it might connect to, but just to cut to the chase, there are definitely many instances in which solar symbolism and phallic symbolism in the ancient world seem to match up, including obelisks, usually erected to sun gods. What I'm getting at here is, for one thing, the sun could be thought of as Uranos's penis, or maybe even the absence of it. In other words, somehow when it got cut off, that created the hole, the gateway that we're seeing everything through. I don't know. I don't know. I'm still trying to put this all together.
It's a possibility.
But definitely one of the things I'm seeing is that the moon itself is also thought of as being the thing that did the cutting. So it's compared to a scythe, especially when it's in a crescent form. But the story of Uranus and Gaia, and Saturn is their child who cut himself out of the womb and in the process cut his father's penis off. The story definitely seems to be indicating that the moon somehow was the scythe. So the moon is being thought of as this thing that is cutting us off from heaven. So anyway, I just start to think about this stuff really literally. Now, I'm not putting this forward as evidence, but it did kind of give me the idea to look at this more fully as being somehow literal. That I got a message from a spirit calling himself Mithras during a Ouija board seance, which I know your listeners, if they've heard me before, know that that's something that I do mainly for inspiration. It's not a textbook to me. I don't take it as literal truth, but it's a way to get ideas sometimes. And the spirit that I spoke to did, I was asking him, what is the moon literally? Because we were talking about how to get out of the cosmos, and he kept showing with the planchette going through the moon. And I was wondering, what the heck are you talking? How would you do that? How does that work? He was showing it as a gateway. And then I asked, what is the moon? And he said something that was a little bit misspelled. So it had a number of options, but one of the ways that I could have interpreted it is person's ass.
Yikes.
There's some reason why I didn't find out for sure if he meant ass or not. But as far as person, I did ask him, is the perfect man, is the Ouroboros literally a person? And he said yes. Actually, that's what he said. He's a man. And then I said, you mean literally a person? Yes. So look, in Gnostic theology, they sometimes talk about a character called the perfect man. They're equating that with Jesus or with the Christ and saying he's on the outside of the prison that we're in and he's going to come in and save us.
That's true.
That would be the position that Uranus is in. I mean, he's on the outside and he's literally a man. And it's a complicated thing to explain, so I won't. But basically, there is a way in which Uranus, who is really the first, you would think of as the highest god because he's the first male god described in Greek mythology, right? And everything comes out from there. All the gods are descended from him. So you think he's the highest. But there's a way in which you can interpret the myths so that he is actually also Zeus. So he's his own grandson. Again, it's too complicated, but basically he projected himself in order to save his own grandchildren, really. Because Zeus, his father Kronos, was swallowing all of his kids. Zeus got rescued by his mother, and then he tricked his dad into swallowing poison, and that's what made Kronos vomit up all the other children. Well, I think that Zeus and Jesus are really the same guy. That's also Uranus or Ouroboros. So it goes along with the Trinity idea that the Father and the Son are really the same character. I think that this all-encompassing creature was able to project itself into its own grandson. And then, well, anyway. See, I told you.
No, it's strange stuff. And the mythology always gets quite tangled and dense, for sure.
Yes.
And this was another thing I wanted to ask you about, because I thought this was pretty fascinating. But last time we also talked a little bit about diamonds, the Superman logo, and the symbolism that's involved there. And it's also pretty dense stuff. But you had said that the Superman logo acts as a symbol of Jewish identity, or maybe we should even say Khazarian elite identity. But this thing where prominent elites from this bloodline tend to change their names to something American sounding, just like Clark Kent, and hide in plain sight, so to speak. The Rothschilds also control the global diamond market, which is just a side note that relates to this stuff. But to bring it forward to the rest of the things we're talking about today, you put up a couple side-by-side images that people will probably recognize. And of course, this is just an audio show, but people, think about the classic Pink Floyd cover of light hitting the prism and creating the rainbow. And now picture the inner chambers of the Great Pyramid. There is a sort of similarity to the angles. And as we're talking about light and certain angles and secret multidimensional doorways, might that similarity between light hitting a prism and the Great Pyramid's inner chambers be a clue to what they were really used for? I think that's provocative. It almost looks like a V with those same angles, coming in from the left, hitting the middle, and then coming out the right in a V shape. I mean, I don't know. I think there's something interesting there. Maybe the pyramids were portals. Maybe there was a time when these realms were open to everyone, and now they're just ruins.
Yeah, I came across this image of the refraction of light through a triangular diamond in this book called Diamond Design by Leo Tolkowski. The reason why is because the diamond that he designed in 1919, that's called the perfect round brilliant cut diamond. That was and still is the best cut of diamond and the most popular cut of diamond now for refracting light in the best and most perfect way. Because if you have it cut any other way, there will be some loss of light. If you shine it at a brilliant cut diamond in the right way, at the right angle, it will come out the top in a perfect rainbow so that none of the light is being lost. All of it is being split into rainbow colors, and none of it is coming out the sides. So that's when you got your absolute perfect cut. The guy who invented this, Leo Tolkowski, yes, he's from a diamond cutting family, but he's also a mathematician genius, and that's why he knew exactly how to design this in just the most perfect way. That's the reason why I was reading this book about how he designed that diamond called Diamond Design. This is all in the Genuflect book. We have a diamond just like that that figures into the plot. I was looking at this book, and in that book there's a picture of another type of diamond and its light refraction, and it looked exactly like the chambers in the Great Pyramid when you look at a side view of that. And so I put up the picture of the diamond with the light refraction on Facebook and just asked people, what do you think this is a picture of? Everybody said they think it's the Great Pyramid. And then lots of people were shocked when I told them actually it's this diamond. But yes, I do think it might shed some light, on what the pyramids were for and how the sun works also in our universe. Because again, yeah, I subscribe to the idea of being totally different than what they say. And it just so happens the perfect round cut brilliant diamond has a specific number of facets, 58. There's 33 of them on the top portion of the diamond. And in fact, the 33rd segment is on the top. That's the flat part that's on the top of the diamond. It would really very much correspond, if you were looking from the top down, it would correspond to that part in the middle. That's a circle on the UN map, UN logo, on the azimuthal equidistant map, the flat earth map, the place where the North Pole is. It would correspond to that. So I've been thinking this for a little while, just wondering if the perfect round brilliant cut diamond design is somehow figured into the design of our world, and that has something to do with the way that light appears in our world from the sun. Yeah, I don't know exactly how it all works, but I am still a little bit puzzled about the way that light appears in our world. And I wonder if there's lenses basically in the system that we can't really see, but that are bouncing it around in ways that create the effects that we see.
That's provocative. And then when you get into the new chronology stuff and this idea of history being just backdated, or that maybe a couple hundred years or a couple thousand years were smudged into it to make it look like the royal families across Europe had been there for a long time, rather than just coming in and taking over in relatively recent history. The secret hyperspace idea comes in handy because these royal bloodlines have had to have emerged from somewhere. Maybe they formulated a plan in hyperspace to come in guns blazing to enslave the planet and alter the history.
Well, there's no doubt in my mind that the new chronology theory, you don't even have to believe Anatoly Fomenko's proposed chronology to understand that he's poked a lot of holes in official chronology to the point where it becomes very believable that you could just take out medieval history and the timeline would make a lot more sense just to get rid of that. And he thinks you can even get rid of ancient history, that everything that we think of as different periods of history are really just retellings of the same story over and over again with different names. Well, that's something that I've been running into in my research for decades, and a problem that I've wondered what to do with, and I think he's got a great approach to it. It's just like with Flat Earth. You don't have to subscribe to whatever alternative the person is proposing to understand that they've poked holes in the official story. So I think he's done that effectively. Velikovsky also had a book called Ages in Chaos, I think, which says that it doesn't make sense to have medieval history in the timeline. So the interesting thing about flat Earth and new chronology theory, they both seem to take the major tinkering in truth back about 500 years. So that's when Fomenko and others think that the timeline was greatly doctored. And it also happens to be around the time that the present heliocentric universe and round Earth theories were formulating and becoming accepted. And I just think that both the history and astrophysics and geography, all of these things, yes, probably were put on top of us around the same time. And the fact that they don't make any sense and we're finding all these problems in them is evidence of all the same thing, which is that, yeah, we're in some kind of a false reality illusion. We're in a prison. We're in a box. A lot of people try to say simulation, and they always think of it as being like a computer game. But I just think it's just what's easy for us to think of. And I feel like we have gotten to this point where we can create technology like that. And so we assume that's the limits.
Right. Well, it's an easy analogy just because it's the only way we can kind of mentally conceive of a place that doesn't take up space. You know, you have an Xbox game disc, and on it is an entire world, but, you know, it's not taking up any physical space, kind of like the show Westworld, where they take a train into Westworld. It's kind of like the path we were talking about with the Masonic tracing board. It's a gateway into a space that doesn't actually take up material space or something like that, a multidimensional space. So I think that's why people do think about it in that concept of a simulation or a false reality, just because, like you said, that's how we wrap our mind around it.
Well, wouldn't you say that any kind of illusion could have the same effect? Like when you're in a dream, it's just as immersive as being in a
VR game or something.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
And then what about magic rituals? You know, people think that they're changing reality by doing magical rituals. And I definitely feel like I've been under a spell. There are times when I think that somebody did something to me with magic where I had a different perception of reality for a while. And when I came out of it, I looked back and I wondered, how could I think that way? You know, how could I see and hear those things that weren't real? But at the time, something happened, some kind of effect created that immersive false world for me, or it seems false now that I'm on the other side of it. I guess what I'm saying is, couldn't there be so many other ways of creating a different type of reality? And I was telling my friend the other night, I was saying, couldn't it be some kind of steampunk way of doing it? Couldn't you, with technology 500 years ago, create an illusion that would be all-encompassing to the people in it? Like in the alchemy books, they show these little vessels, and they create little artificial people, they call them homunculi, that live inside of the little vessels that are born from the marriages of different chemicals. And they're living inside of a tiny little world in a bottle. Well, what if those people thought that the bottle they were in was the limits of their world, and they had their own myths and history and everything that was very real to them, but on the other side of the bottle, there's just some alchemist sitting there at his desk looking at them and putting little powders in to change things. So it's very hard to imagine how God did whatever he did. And so we try to come up with different metaphors based on what we're doing and what we can do. But if we can imagine creating a world that's false but completely convincing to the people that are in it, don't you think that 500 years ago someone could have imagined doing that? But they wouldn't have thought of a computer. They would have just thought, how can I create, for one thing, an illusion that's very convincing, and then add magic and hypnotism on top of that, invoke gods, invoke some other agency to help tie it all together so that it becomes all-inclusive. See, the reason why I say these things is because that's what's hinted at in the alchemy texts, and that's what's said much more blatantly in magic texts. And just adding in an idea here, and maybe we can talk about it in a future show, I have an idea of who might have done this about 500 years ago, and I very well think it's possible that it was John Dee. The person that we're told is John Dee in our histories is a much more important character. In fact, he's essentially the demiurge, the god of the world that we're in. He created this little reality bubble that we're in. I don't have time to prove that or lay out my reasons, but hopefully by the next time I'm on the show, I will have produced something that explains that a little bit better. But yeah, just imagine that for now. Just think, well, what could someone have done a few hundred years ago using what they would have considered back then magic, but also mixing it in with what they considered back then high tech to create maybe something that we're living in now, you know? Just think about it. I think then you'll start to think about the artificial reality idea separate from just a nerd sitting in his mom's bedroom playing a video game.
Sure.
There's a lot of different ways to picture this, I guess. And it helps a lot for me because it doesn't desacralize everything, you know? Even if when I say that John Dee could be the demiurge, to me that doesn't make it lowly or unsacred or ugly or profane. There's just more facts that make it all more interesting, the world that we're in. It just opens up more and more possibilities to me. So I don't mean to hurt anyone's feelings or step on anyone's beliefs when I propose these types of ideas. I still worship God, I still believe in God, and I still believe in the good side of things. But it's okay to open your minds and to take myths literally to a certain extent. They are parables or metaphors, but a lot of times they are metaphors for things that are real.
Right.
And they're in fact more real than you can even handle. So they have to tell you a little fairy tale to try to ease you into it. So.
Right. Well, like our theme song says, we know they're lying to us, just don't know to what degree. And that is why you have to speculate on everything. You have to reel everything back and unpack it and look at it from every possible angle and say, yeah, maybe it's this, maybe it's that. You got to throw out anything we've been told because you can't trust the people who've told us. So I think, it might sound pretty far out to some people, but you got to get far out to try to unpack this stuff. And just to relate all this back to Bloomberg and the Mithraeum, we've seen a lot more about that since the last time we talked. I think it's actually open now, but is there more to that story since we last talked? Is the suggestion still that this would be an indicator that the elite are trying to put the pieces of these gateways back together?
Oh, no, I don't think they're trying to put them back together. I think Bloomberg, and I also suspect Elon Musk and others, are trying to get out. And I think that that's why he chose to resurrect the Mithraeum in Britain, in London. There's several in Britain, actually. But I think it's because beneath the British Isles is where Kronos, they say, is buried. And buried in a tomb, yes, but he's actually still alive and could be resurrected at any time. That's where Plutarch said he was. And then Mithras is the same as Kronos. Kronos is the guy that cut his way out of the cosmic egg, the womb of Uranus and Gaia. So that story of Kronos or Mithras cutting himself out is a story of getting out of one enclosed reality and getting out into a higher one. And then it's indicated that he created his own reality. So I think that is what Musk and Bloomberg are up to. They want to be like Mithras.
Right.
And so in the story, I had a character based on Bloomberg who's doing rituals, neo-Mithraic rituals, with the intention of opening up a portal in the sky to escape to a higher realm and then turn this one into a slave of the higher realm. Because that's the way I see the universe. I mentioned Atlantis might be a realm that fell beneath us. Therefore, it's the foundation. It is a slave to us. It is like Atlas holding us up. If we were to become subsumed beneath a higher realm, then we would be the slaves to them, and it would be our job to hold them up. And you wouldn't even necessarily realize it. All of a sudden, a burden would be put upon you. You would feel it in all sorts of different ways, but you wouldn't know where it was coming from. I think that may have happened to us recently, actually. But yeah, the Mithraeum is open. It opened last year, I guess. I've seen some videos about it, and I have a friend who I interviewed recently who went there, so he got a glimpse of it, of the Mithraeum, but not the office building that's next to it. I had that as a location for several of the scenes in my story. They were recycling all of these body fluids for alchemy. There was a system that was mixing all of the fluids together in the ceiling. And I don't know if any of that turned out to be true or not. That was what I had taken Bloomberg's blueprints to indicate, because there's a secret object on the ceiling of the first floor of the office building that he has there in London that's right next to the Mithraeum that they revitalized. It's called the Vortex. But it's some kind of a feature, I don't know, and involving water, and I don't know what it really is. And apparently you have to work there before you can see it. So the secret hasn't gotten out yet. But in my story, this is where the body fluids siphoned from all of the people in the building get mixed together for the alchemy. And then that's all part of a process that the point is to open up a hole in the sky to the other dimensions. Like I said, I don't know for a fact that that is happening. But what is interesting, my friend went over to that area and saw everything that he was allowed to see inside the building and around it. And he has tons of pictures of restaurants and stores and little alleys that they've renamed. And all of these names go along with pedo, homo, sex ideas. Right. Those are the type of rituals my characters were doing in the story. So maybe that's why my friend was looking for that, and maybe we're being selective in the way we interpret it. But that's what all of these cute little names for bars and restaurants right in the same area that just popped up because of this building opening. All of these things just seem to link up to pedophilic and homosexual sex. So I don't know. I'm going to come out with a report about it soon, and you can come to tracytwyman.com and see it, and you can decide for yourself if we're just seeing things or if it's really there.
Wow. Yeah, that is a thorny area for sure. And it does kind of relate to the Tower of Babel story, where it's just like about trying to build a tower to heaven and then getting struck down. Like, nope, you can't have this. We're going to break this gateway that you've made. I think it kind of has an interesting parallel. And I've always liked the idea of kind of like the Van Allen radiation belt thing, that we can't get through. This is some kind of quarantine prison environment. Whether it's flat or round, in the flat earth paradigm, it would be the firmament. In the round earth, it would be the Van Allen radiation belt. But in both cases, just the provocative idea that we cannot leave here, that, this is some kind of trap. It's just interesting.
Yeah, the idea of Eden being cut off from us with a flaming sword, as they called it in Genesis, to prevent us from going back in. Well, the book of Genesis has a lot of stuff happening in the very beginning, the very first few chapters, a lot of action in there that's really compact. So just a few lines away, really, a couple chapters away from Adam and Eve being kicked out of Genesis, and you have the flood. God creates a flood to rid it of all these giants, and then the very next thing that happens after that is the Tower of Babel story. So it's almost like these first few chapters are all about trying to get back into Eden, and God keeps making it clear that you can't get back in. I imagine the flaming sword as almost being like a force field or something, an electrified fence, something that zaps you when you try to get through it. And that's what it sounds like with the Tower of Babel, is they got up close enough and they got zapped. But not only that, you're right, then they got their languages changed somehow to prevent us all from understanding each other. Well, that could go along easily with everything we're describing as happening 500 years ago. They messed up our history. They messed up our science. All of that would go along with having our languages messed up. And it's kind of the same thing.
Yeah.
And in fact, I think we see hints of how the history got messed up by looking at etymology. A lot of work that I've done recently is in this translation of this one text from 1818 that was written in Latin, and I had it translated and worked on interpreting it. And interpreting it took longer than translating it, because a lot of the things in there just didn't make sense with what I thought I knew about history. And then I started having to dig into the etymology of words in order to get the correct translation of each one, the ones that weren't making sense. And I just ended up realizing that I was going down avenues of alternative interpretations of history just because of the etymology. The etymology connections were showing me, oh, this thing over here from this other culture, totally separate culture thousands of miles away from the other one, this somehow obviously influenced this thing because they're almost the same word and they mean almost the same thing. And you can see how this one came before the other one. And yet the connections that I was seeing, they were obvious, but they didn't quite match with mainstream history. And I started to realize that these were just clues pointing to the chronology has been mixed up. All of these things have a common origin. Like when words are similar and mean the same thing, or when symbols with similar names pop up in two totally different cultures that supposedly didn't influence each other, and they're separated by thousands of years. This is an indication that they do have a common origin, and people are just making stuff up when they say that this culture and that culture were separated by hundreds of years. Again, I'm not saying I don't have an answer for you about what the real history is, but every time I dig deep into it, which I frequently have for my projects, to the point where I have to go down into the primary sources, the original copy of something that there's no other copies of, or maybe there's only 3 of them in the world and I'll see one of the 3. Every time I have to find exactly which book that word was first used in the first time. Every single time I have to dig that deep into history in order to get an answer for something that I'm writing about. I find that the official history just does not make sense. And it always points to some kind of synchronism where all the cultures must have a recent common origin, or it just doesn't make sense otherwise. Mm-hmm. So yeah, just the Tower of Babel metaphor makes perfect sense because very recently someone came in and messed up our understanding of everything. The languages, the words that we use for things are clues that the puzzle pieces have been thrown about haphazardly. And the really amazing thing is it didn't happen gradually. If it happened gradually, then that in itself would be a process of how it happened. But it didn't happen suddenly, which is exactly what the Tower of Babel story says. All of a sudden, God came down and screwed everything up for everybody. Well, I think that's the world we're living in. And I think the movie Dark City is probably the best fictional creation that anyone has made that explains what it's like now that we're here. Every day they wake up in that movie and things have been changed around them slightly. Most of them don't notice. But if you do start to try to remember how things really went, what led up to the events that you see today, things start to get really foggy. But if you're really aware, then you might get a feeling at least that something's wrong. You might get a tingle in your spine and you realize, oh, I'm on the edge of remembering something, but I don't. That's what it's like for me every time I dig into history. I feel like, oh, I'm on the edge of remembering something, but I can't. And it's because someone came in very recently and messed it up. And maybe they continue to. I mean, in that movie, they do it every night. And, now we've got people saying there's Mandela effect happening everywhere. Well, I used to laugh at that. And this last project that I did, the last 2 projects I did, I ran into this increasing problem where I would have a theory, something I'm working on based on a certain set of facts. And I'd write out the theory, and then I'd go back to check the spelling of something and find the facts changed. It happened to me several times, and maybe I'm getting old, but come on, I've been doing this for a long time too, I think I'm pretty good at this. And I was just getting things wrong all over the place. It just didn't make any sense, especially when I wrote down really detailed notes the first time, Right. So how does this stuff happen? I don't know, man. But I think that there's definitely so many more things going on beyond our general awareness.
Absolutely. And even for people who don't like the flat earth paradigm, the guys over at the Thunderbolts Project, which I've been a pretty big fan of, I think they have some pretty interesting, compelling ideas. They talk about all the myths of the Golden Age relating to a time when Saturn was our sun, that we were in some kind of envelope that made the entire planet's environment and climate seem like San Diego, like 70 and sunny all the time, but it was more of a twilight type of sun. It was a more purplish haze, and they seem to have extracted details in both science and the myths that make this seem possible, that there was a change in the solar system. So whatever your paradigm, there are still people picking at this idea that the sun has changed, that the environment has been radically altered, and it's interesting stuff. And another thing that I just wanted to ask you about is this recent video, this recent upload on YouTube where you asked the question, is Mecca at the real North Pole? And that's an interesting idea. It seems like a lot of the world's religions are bad games of telephone where they were trying to tell us something really important initially, and now it's all lost in a shallow money extortion scheme. That seems to be the direction most of them have gone. But at the core, like we always say, there is some kind of truth there trying to be revealed, and it's a provocative idea. We've talked about diamonds and the Black Mountain and things like that, and here we have a religion that worships this black cube. It's curious. Could this be related to a hidden hyperspace place?
Well, I certainly think so. I put up that video. It was just an excerpt of something else, but it really kind of shocked me when I looked into that a little bit more deeply. What it is Muslims who are praying to Mecca in North America. The majority of them pray towards the northeast. And you can try this out. If you have a smartphone, you can find apps for a Qibla compass. There's several of them. Qibla, Qibla. The Qibla is the line between wherever you are and Mecca. More generally, it's the line between you and whatever shrine you're going to pray towards. Well, originally, Muhammad had said that the Qibla should be pointed towards Jerusalem. And then he got a message saying that you should point it towards Mecca instead, and that's what it's been ever since. But yes, the Qibla apps will tell you to point northeast to pray towards Mecca, which they have some explanations for. And I'm just going to say I was scratching my head like I couldn't really follow the explanations. Didn't totally make sense to me. The only way it makes sense, and other people have pointed this out, is if you're looking at the azimuthal equidistant map and you just draw a straight line from somewhere in North America and basically go over the top of the planet, then go over to Mecca, then that's, I guess, the shortest bearing line between you and Mecca. But it's strange to me because pointing your altar towards the east, for instance, is such a big thing in Christianity, and don't Jews even do that? I think so. So for there to be two totally different ways of interpreting the way you're supposed to pray to Mecca is amazing to me. And it seems like if that's the way you do it in North America, then somewhere else in the world, if you're pointing east, this is going to be totally different. You're going to be pointed in different directions. It doesn't make any sense to me. So it in itself, the fact that Muslims do this is almost an indication of flat earth in itself. And then you add in some of the mythological connections, some of the symbolic meaning of this. Yeah, you mentioned the connection with the black rock at the North Pole, the alleged black rock at the North Pole. Well, the Kaaba that people are praying to in Mecca is a cubic tent built around a black rock. And originally that black rock supposedly was much larger, and we only see segments of it because it got broken up. But they say it's a meteorite and that it's magnetic. And I even saw some videos from some people in Saudi Arabia saying that they thought there's a column of magnetism coming up out of it and reaching up into space, and that really the world's magnetic poles are actually coming from Mecca. And so, yeah, it made me think, okay, if the black rock is what's at the North Pole and people are pointing their Qiblas north and they think that's pointing towards the Kaaba, and then the Kaaba, of course, it embodies all the same things that the world mountain does in mythology of being, the center of the gods. Basically, they say, the Islamic interpretation of what Mecca is, they're saying this is the foundation stone of the world. I've heard that the Kaaba stone contained somehow the seeds of life when it fell from heaven. This is the navel of the world, right? It's just exactly what they say about the world mountain. It's also exactly the same thing that is said about the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. And there's a story about Muhammad falling asleep at the Kaaba, and then he takes a journey that is interpreted as not being a dream, but actually a real heavenly journey. And a horse called Barak, which means lightning, gives him a ride over to Jerusalem. And then he lifts off from Jerusalem and goes up to heaven and sees everything, heaven and hell and all the different realms. But it's definitely, there's the same symbolism for both Mecca, Jerusalem, and the Rupus Nigra world mountain Black Rock at the North Pole. And then you have the story of Muhammad connecting all three of them, I think, in a way. And you even have these interesting connections with the stories of Kybele and of Mithras, because Mithras was born out of a rock. Kybele was supposedly a rock that fell from heaven. And then she supposedly had a child called Attis who got castrated. She inspired to castrate himself, but I think that Attis and Mithras are really the same guy. And Mithras was born from a rock that was inseminated with lightning. And Barak, as I said, is the name of the horse that gave Muhammad a ride, and it means lightning. So, I don't know, yeah, the whole Muhammad story is really interesting. Unfortunately, it's a very dangerous topic, so I have a lot to say about it. I'm trying to find the right way to present it. Well, I just don't want to get hurt,
right.
It's unfortunate, but...
Yeah, exactly. It's something a lot of people are thinking about now more these days. And that stuff you just laid out, it really does put a new spin on the whole Saturn death cult and just the black cube symbolism overall. It could be the same kind of thing as the secret key behind the Masonic symbolism, perhaps. Like, it's all related to gateways or the beginning of this world or something to that effect.
Well, I'll try to keep this short. I know I'm running out of time here, but I realized just yesterday it really does connect to what you just said. Okay, they say in Freemasonry, they call those three stars, I think, the three greater lights or maybe the three lesser lights. The point is they overtly connect them to the three monotheistic religions. And if you think about it, of course they do, because the moon is a crescent. And usually they show even a star next to the crescent. That's Islam. The sun is the solar symbolism of Jesus. And then frequently that star in the middle, which they say, by the way, is Mercury, and that's another story. The star in the middle, which shines brighter than the real sun and is where the twisting path is going to, that's the higher realm, obviously. They often represent it with a hexagram. So that's Judaism. I have one tracing board where they show the cubic New Jerusalem coming down through the hole where the keystone has been removed. So they're showing that as being Jerusalem. Again, the yellow brick road leading to three different emerald cities, but they're probably really all the same, leading to Vatican City or Jerusalem or Mecca. And I don't know exactly what this board is saying. It's almost like they're trying to take credit for all three.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Yeah, again, I have no problem with Jews. I have lots of Jewish friends, lots of Jewish ex-boyfriends. Not lots, but I don't want to sound like I've dated everybody, but I have two at least. This isn't a racist thing at all, but you got to admit that their influence in the world greatly outshines their numerical representation in the population. And we're very much living in a Judeo-Christo-Muslim world. No one would deny that Islam wouldn't be Islam without Judaism and Christianity too. So who are these guys? I once got fired from a record store job, okay? Part of it was because I had been having a discussion with some of my coworkers about David Icke. They knew who he was. They asked me if I liked him, and I said what I thought about David Icke. I had an opinion. I sort of liked him, whatever. But anyway, I got fired later, and I found out that they thought David Icke was using the word reptilians as a code word for Jews.
Mm-hmm.
And so when they asked me if I liked David Icke, that was their test to see if I didn't like Jews. Huh. And I had no idea that was the test. So I was not saying that. I don't think that that's what David Icke meant. But it sheds a light on something, which is, if you do believe that Jews or some family or subset of Jews, that's really the elite and the ones in control of this whole system, what do we mean by Jews? If it's easy enough for you to imagine someone representing them as a reptilian, why? And in fact, is that not really what lies behind, in a certain way, what David Icke was saying? He was not saying that to be racist. It's merely it follows from the suggestions, right?
Right. There's just something hiding within humanity that is genetically different.
Right. And these particular people might be genetically linked to a group that somehow is, very different from the rest of humanity. And maybe in some way they are predisposed to holding the keys to heaven and hell, as they say. They have some way of interacting with the other dimensions that we don't, or that normal people don't under normal conditions. I don't know. I used to know this guy named Nicholas DeVere who believed that he was from what he called a dragon race. And he didn't think that his ancestors had green skin or anything like that, but he did think that they had magical powers. So anyway, I think that, well, he said it was like it's in the DNA. If you're a dragon, when you do magical rituals, occult rituals, it sets off things that are in your DNA from your ancestors, and you can actually evoke them and commune with them. And then he said, when you do magic to try to change reality, that it works better for people who are dragons. And now that I'm thinking about the hyperspace aspect of all of this, it just makes me think about what he said and how a lot of the gods and heroes and supernatural characters and myths do shapeshift. Almost every major god has 5 or 6 different animals, at least, that he sometimes appears as, or sometimes a combination of one animal type head and different animal type body. Yeah, what if there are creatures that are really very mutable like that? So anyway, I don't know how we got from Jews to that. I'm sorry.
Well, no, it's cool. You had just mentioned getting fired from a record store, and I was going to leave this out, but you also talk about Mount Analog, that there's a story there in a book that kind of talks about a hidden secret mountain in the middle of the ocean. And Mount Analog, funny enough, is a pretty famous record store in LA, which is just kind of funny because you had the record store anecdote.
Oh, I didn't know that. I would love to go there sometime.
Oh, yeah. It's on Figueroa.
I'm going to check it out. Has it been there for a while?
I believe so. I think it's older than I am. It's got to be. I mean, what record store isn't at this point?
Wow.
No one's opening a record store in the 2000s.
True.
But it is interesting that that's just another tale, the Mount Analog tale, that speaks to a hidden mountain.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, that's cool. Wow.
Right on. Well, fascinating stuff as always, Tracy. You've managed to tie in a ton of symbolism, mythology, the plot lines of famous works, and possibly revealed a pretty massive secret. Any idea where this work is taking you or what the next chapter is going to be?
It's all about the anal birth of the homunculus, my friend.
All right.
Yes, it's all about that.
Well, that sounds like fun stuff.
That's all I have to say, man. That's all I have to say.
Fair enough. Well, I do love the work. Maybe we'll talk about John D. and anal births in the future, but tell the people where they can read, watch, and subscribe to your stuff for more.
Sure. TracyTwyman.com. And when you get there, I would recommend looking for the Plus Ultra Premium membership button and signing up so that you can see and hear absolutely everything that I present.
Right on. Yeah, see, I only got Plus here, but you got Plus Ultra. Clearly that next level.
No kidding. Yeah, of course. You got to have that Ultra aspect.
Man, I'm missing out.
You should go Ultra.
Well, I do think it's really awesome material. The Hidden Hyperspace Kingdoms, the Plus Ultra Secret Society that possibly unlocked this, the new meaning to the symbols we see in the Black Cube, and the Masonic Tracing Board, and just the honorary 33rd degree, how it's kind of a quasi between the worlds degree and quite possibly an allusion to a place that exists in the same way. And maybe Walt Disney knows about it and built a park around a secret doorway to take children to. It's just great. So awesome stuff. You are the best. Thanks for sharing your latest and keep at it.
Thank you very much.
You got it. Holy hell and hallelujah, people. This was one hell of a return to the weird rides we all know and love.